The deafening crash of thunder masked the desperate knocks on Alan Foster's tow truck window that stormy night, but nothing could drown out the weight of the decision he was about to make. Risk everything to help a stranded neurosurgeon reach a dying child, or play it safe like he had for the 10 lonely years since losing his wife. 48 hours later, as foreclosure notices littered his kitchen table and his children's futures hung in the balance, 12 mysterious black SUVs appeared on his rural Woodhaven driveway, bringing with them billionaire medical innovator Thomas Blackwell, and an offer that would not only transform the life of single father Alan Foster, but revolutionize healthcare access for an entire forgotten community. All because one ordinary man made an extraordinary choice when it mattered most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Alan Foster's weathered front porch as he made his way slowly to his rusted pickup truck. His calloused hands, gnarled from decades of hard work, clutched a thermos of coffee as his faithful old retriever Jackson trotted faithfully at his heels. At 48, Alan's body protested with each step, back pain gnawing at his spine like a persistent winter chill that never quite left his bones. The modest 2-bedroom house behind him had seen better days, paint peeled from the siding, and the roof would need attention before winter. But mortgage payments on a tow truck driver's salary left little room for home repairs, especially with Brian's college tuition and Rebecca's braces to consider. "Come on, old boy," Alan murmured to the ancient pickup that had seen better days. The engine sputtered reluctantly before catching with a familiar rumble, providing small comfort in the pre-dawn silence. Jackson settled into the passenger seat, his graying muzzle resting on the window ledge as they pulled away from the house. The streets of Woodhaven were quiet at 5:30 a.m. Alan drove past shuttered storefronts and darkened houses, his mind already mapping out the day ahead. Morning shift at Foster's Towing, where he now worked for the new owner who'd kept the name but changed everything else. Then a quick lunch break to check on his father at the care facility before pulling a second shift to cover for Hector, who was out with the flu. The radio crackled with the local morning show. And the National Weather Service has issued a severe storm warning for Woodhaven County and surrounding areas. Residents should prepare for heavy rainfall, potential flooding, and high winds beginning this afternoon and continuing through tomorrow morning. Stay tuned for updates. Alan frowned, turning up the volume slightly. Storms meant accidents, and accidents meant more calls, but they also meant dangerous conditions for towing. After 26 years behind the wheel, he respected the risks, but couldn't deny the extra money would help. Brian's tuition payment was already 2 weeks late. "Looks like we're in for a busy day, Jackson," he said, rubbing the dog's head as they pulled into the nearly empty parking lot of Foster's Towing. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Alan hung his jacket on the hook that still bore the faded label A. Foster in his own handwriting. How strange that he now clocked in at the business his father had built and that he had once expected to inherit before medical bills had forced the sale. "Morning, Charlie," Alan called to the young dispatcher already settled behind the desk. "Headset in place." "Morning, Mr. Foster," Charlie responded, looking up from his computer. "Dispatch already got 2 calls waiting. Mrs. Henderson's car won't start again, and there's a fender bender out on Highway 16. Alan nodded, taking the assignment slips. "I'll take Mrs. Henderson first. She's just a jump start. Tell Highway 16 I'll be there in 40. The morning proceeded with routine efficiency. Mrs. Henderson's aging Buick needed more than a jump start, but Alan coaxed it to life with the practiced skill of someone who had been working on engines since childhood. The fender bender was minor. 2 college kids who'd bumped into each other in the morning fog. By noon, Alan had handled 4 calls and was pulling into the parking lot of Pine Valley Care Center, Jackson waiting patiently in the truck. The antiseptic smell hit him as soon as he entered the facility. Alan signed the visitor log and made his way down the familiar corridor to room 213. His father, William Foster, sat in a wheelchair by the window, gaze fixed on the gathering clouds outside. "Hey, Dad," Alan said, pulling up a chair beside him. "How are you feeling today?" William turned slowly, his eyes cloudy with cataracts and confusion. "Jimmy? That you?" Alan's heart sank slightly. His father was having one of his bad days, mistaking him for his long-deceased brother. "No, Dad. It's Alan, your son." William frowned, studying Alan's face. "Alan's just a boy, got that towing company to run when he grows up." "I did run it, Dad, for a while." Alan kept his voice gentle, having learned there was no point in correcting his father's timeline too forcefully. "Are they treating you okay here? Nurse Patty said you didn't eat much breakfast." The visit continued with Alan filling the silence, with updates about Brian and Rebecca, careful to edit out the financial struggles and Rebecca's recent troubles at school. William drifted in and out of lucidity, occasionally recognizing Alan before slipping back into confused memories. When the lunch attendants arrived with William's meal, Alan took it as his cue to leave. "I'll be back on Friday, Dad," he promised, though he wasn't sure his father understood. As he signed out at the front desk, he glanced at the monthly bill statement waiting in his father's folder. The insurance covered most, but his portion had increased again. Another expense he could barely manage. Back in the truck, Alan checked his phone to find 3 missed calls from Charlie and a text message. "Storm picking up. All hands needed. Multiple incidents." "So much for lunch," Alan muttered to Jackson, pulling back onto the road as the first heavy raindrops began to splatter against the windshield. By mid-afternoon, the storm had intensified dramatically. Visibility dropped to mere yards as Alan guided his tow truck carefully along the slick roads of Woodhaven. He'd already helped 4 stranded motorists and delivered 2 damaged vehicles to the local repair shop. The county emergency services had issued flash flood warnings for low-lying areas, and the police scanner in his truck crackled constantly with reports of downed trees and power lines. "Foster's Towing, we've got another one for you," Charlie's voice came through the radio. "Woman stranded on Mountain Pass Road, about 5 miles east of the Murphy Creek Bridge. Says her car died completely. Won't even jump." Alan glanced at the dashboard clock, 4:45 p.m. His shift technically ended at 5, and Mountain Pass Road would be treacherous in this weather. But the thought of leaving someone stranded in the worsening storm didn't sit right. "Copy that, Charlie. I'll take it. Probably my last call of the day, though. This weather's getting worse." "Roger that. Be careful out there, Alan. Road conditions are deteriorating fast." Alan turned the truck toward Mountain Pass Road, windshield wipers working furiously against the deluge. Jackson shifted uneasily in the passenger seat, sensing his owner's tension. The narrow mountain road twisted through dense forest, climbing steadily in elevation with steep drops on one side. In good weather, it was scenic. In this storm, it was downright dangerous. The rain had intensified to a blinding sheet by the time Alan spotted the stranded vehicle. A sleek black sedan pulled to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly. He positioned his tow truck carefully in front of it, engaging his own flashing lights to warn any approaching traffic. Grabbing his raincoat and flashlight, Alan patted Jackson's head. "Stay, boy, I'll be right back." The force of the wind and rain nearly knocked him sideways as he stepped out of the truck. He hunched forward, making his way to the sedan. Inside, a woman sat in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear, her expression a mixture of frustration and desperation. Alan tapped on the window. She rolled it down slightly, the interior light illuminating a face that seemed entirely out of place on this rural mountain road during a storm. Professionally styled. Dark hair, expensive-looking glasses, and an air of authority despite her obvious distress. Foster's towing? Alan had to raise his voice to be heard over the storm. What seems to be the problem, ma'am? Thank God you're here, the woman replied, ending her call. My car just died completely about 20 minutes ago. I've tried everything, but nothing's working. I need to get to Bayside Medical Center immediately. It's an emergency. Alan nodded, rain streaming down his face despite his hood. Let me take a quick look under the hood, but in this weather, diagnostics are going to be limited. Might be better to tow you to our shop in Woodhaven. You don't understand. The woman's voice took on an urgent edge. I'm Dr. Melissa Morgan, Chief of Neurosurgery at Bayside. I have a critical patient who needs emergency surgery within the next 3 hours. A little boy with an intracranial hemorrhage. If I don't get there... She let the sentence hang, its implications clear. Alan's mind quickly calculated the situation. Bayside was nearly 40 miles away, across flooded roads, and through the worst of the storm. Even if he could get her car running, it wouldn't be safe for her to drive alone in these conditions. Your car's not going anywhere tonight, Doctor, Alan said firmly. Battery's corroded and there's water in your electrical system, but I can give you a ride to Bayside. Relief washed over Dr. Morgan's face, quickly followed by concern. In this weather, are you sure it's safe? A flash of lightning illuminated the steep drop-off beside the road, followed by a tremendous crash of thunder. Safe? Definitely not. But the alternative was unthinkable. I know these roads better than anyone, Alan said, with more confidence than he felt. And I've got chains for the tires. We need to move quickly, though. The creek at the bottom of the pass floods in storms. Like this. If it overruns the bridge, we'll have to find another route, and that would add an hour at least. Dr. Morgan didn't hesitate further. She grabbed a leather briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out into the rain. Alan helped her to the tow truck, opening the passenger door where Jackson immediately scooted over to make room. That's Jackson, Alan explained as they settled in. Hope you don't mind dogs. Not at all, Dr. Morgan replied, already on her phone again. I need to call the hospital and let them know I'm on my way. She glanced at Alan as he started the engine. Thank you for doing this. Most people wouldn't have stopped in this weather, let alone offered to drive so far. Alan shrugged, focusing on carefully maneuvering the truck back onto the slick road. Just doing my job, Doctor. Let's get you to your patient. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. As they began the treacherous journey down Mountain Pass Road, the full fury of the storm descended upon them. Wind buffeted the tow truck, and sheets of rain reduced visibility to almost nothing. Alan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes straining to follow the road's edge. Dr. Morgan finished her call and tucked the phone away. The surgical team is prepping everything. They'll be ready when we arrive. She looked out at the nearly impenetrable darkness. If we arrive, she added quietly. We'll get there, Alan assured her, though his own doubts grew as they approached the bottom of the pass where Murphy Creek crossed beneath the road. In normal times, it was a gentle stream. Today, angry brown water surged just inches below. The bridge's surface. Alan slowed the truck to a crawl as they approached the crossing. The wooden bridge creaked ominously beneath them, debris carried by the current slamming against its supports. They were halfway across when a massive section of tree trunk came hurtling downstream, crashing into the bridge with enough force to shake the entire structure. "Hold on!" Alan shouted, accelerating suddenly as he felt the bridge shift beneath them. They lurched forward, the truck's rear wheels spinning momentarily before finding purchase. The bridge gave another tremendous shudder as they cleared it, and in the rearview mirror, Alan watched in horror as the entire structure tore free of its moorings and was swept away in the raging current. Dr. Morgan's face had gone pale. "That was her too close," Alan finished, heart pounding. But we made it. Main roads just ahead should be better maintained. As they turned onto Route 43, Alan's radio crackled to life. "Alan, Charlie here. You copy?" Alan grabbed the handset. "I copy, Charlie. Just got across Murphy Creek Bridge before it went out." "Jesus, Alan, we just got the alert about that bridge collapsing. Are you okay?" "We're fine. Got the stranded motorist with me, taking her to Bayside." A pause. "Bayside? Alan, that's way outside our service area. Frank's gonna have your hide." Alan grimaced. Frank Calloway, the new owner of Foster's Towing, was a stickler for service boundaries and overtime costs. "Can't be helped. It's an emergency. She's a doctor, needs to perform surgery. Frank called looking for you, wanted you back at the shop. An hour ago. I covered for you, but thanks, Charlie. I'll deal with Frank later." Alan replaced the handset, aware of Dr. Morgan watching him. "Will this cause problems for you?" she asked. "With your employer?" Alan kept his eyes on the road. "Nothing to worry about. Getting you to that hospital is what matters right now." The next hour passed in tense concentration as Alan navigated flooded roads and detours, the storm's intensity never lessening. Dr. Morgan alternated between making calls to the hospital and sitting in taut silence, her fingers drumming nervously. On her briefcase, "The boy," Alan said finally, breaking a particularly long silence. "The one you're going to operate on. How old is he?" 8, Dr. Morgan replied softly. "Zachary Phillips. He fell from a tree this morning, seemed fine at first, but developed symptoms of intracranial pressure a few hours later. Classic presentation of an epidural hematoma. The local hospital doesn't have a neurosurgeon, so they called me." She glanced at the truck's clock. "We have less than 2 hours now before the pressure could cause irreversible damage." Alan thought of Rebecca at 8, fearless and full of life. The image of a child in danger sharpened his resolve. "We'll get you there in time," he promised, pressing the accelerator as they reached a relatively clear stretch of highway. They were making good progress when flashing blue lights appeared ahead. A police cruiser blocked the road, an officer in a rain slicker waving vehicles to stop. Alan pulled up to the barricade. "Roads closed ahead," the officer shouted over the storm. "Downed power lines across the highway. You'll need to take the detour." "How long is the detour?" Alan asked, heart sinking. "Adds about 40 minutes, back through Hayesville and around." Alan glanced at Dr. Morgan, who shook her head slightly. "We don't have 40 minutes to spare, officer. This is Dr. Morgan, from Bayside Medical. She needs to get to the hospital for an emergency surgery." The officer hesitated, looking at Dr. Morgan for confirmation. She leaned across. "Officer, I have an 8-year-old boy with an epidural hematoma waiting for surgery. If I don't get there within the hour, he could suffer permanent brain damage or worse. I'd escort you myself, but the power line's alive," the officer explained. "It's not just a precaution, it's genuinely not passable." He paused, then pointed to a barely visible dirt road to the right. "There is Sawmill Road. It's not maintained, strictly speaking, and it gets rough, but local farmers use it. It would put you about 5 miles east of where this blockage ends." "I know it," Alan said, already turning the wheel. "Thank you, officer." As they bumped onto the rutted dirt road, now little more than a muddy track, Dr. Morgan gripped the dashboard. "Is this safe?" "Safer than waiting," Alan replied grimly. "Hang on, this'll be rough." The road was barely deserving of the name, a washed-out track through dense forest that tested even the tow truck's heavy-duty suspension. Mud splashed up the sides of the vehicle as Alan carefully navigated around fallen branches and deep puddles. Jackson whined softly from the middle seat, sensing the tension. "We're off-road," Dr. Morgan observed unnecessarily, wincing as they bounced through a particularly deep rut. "How much farther on this path?" "About 3 miles, Alan estimated, squinting through the rain-lashed windshield. Then we hit County Road 8, which should take us straight to the highway. He didn't mention his concern about whether the small wooden bridges over the irrigation ditches would hold the weight of his truck. They had covered perhaps half the distance when the truck's front wheels suddenly sank deep into mud, the engine whining as Alan tried to power through. The wheels spun uselessly, digging themselves deeper. "No, no, no," Alan muttered, trying different techniques to rock the vehicle free. Nothing worked. They were stuck fast in the middle of nowhere, in a raging storm, with a child's life hanging. In the balance, Dr. Morgan checked her watch, her face grim. "How long to get us out of this?" Alan calculated quickly. "If I had another vehicle to pull us, minutes. Without one—" He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. Determination hardened Dr. Morgan's features. "Then we walk." "Walk? It's 3 miles through the forest in a storm, then at least 10 more on the county road before we reach civilization. Do you have a better suggestion? A little boy is going to die if I don't get to that hospital." She was already gathering her briefcase and preparing to open the door. Alan made a quick decision. "Wait, let me try something first." He reached for the radio. "Charlie, you copy?" The response came through staticky but audible. "I copy, Alan. Where are you?" Frank's furious. "Stuck on Sawmill Road, about 2 miles in from Route 9. Road's washed out. I need someone with 4-wheel drive to pull us out ASAP. Sawmill Road? Jesus, Alan. No one's going to come out there in this storm." Alan's jaw tightened. "Charlie, there's a kid's life at stake. Call Sheriff Patterson. Tell him Dr. Morgan from Bayside needs emergency transport for a critical surgery. We need help now." As Charlie signed off, promising to make the calls, Alan turned to Dr. Morgan. "If anyone can get to us, it's the sheriff. He's got a modified Jeep that can handle this." "Terrain." Dr. Morgan nodded, but her expression remained tight with worry. "And if he can't? Then we'll walk," Alan said simply. "But let's give him 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes stretched into an eternity as they sat in tense silence, listening to the storm rage around them and the occasional updates from Charlie. The sheriff was on another emergency call, but would head their way as soon as possible. No ETA could be provided. When 20 minutes had passed with no sign of help, Dr. Morgan reached for the door handle again. "I can't wait any longer." Before Alan could respond, headlights appeared through the trees behind them, approaching slowly but steadily. Relief washed over him as he recognized the distinctive light bar of Sheriff Patterson's Jeep. "That's our ride," he said, reaching for his jacket and flashlight. "Jackson, stay!" The sheriff pulled up behind them, rolling down his window as Alan approached. "Foster! Of all the damn fool places to get stuck!" Despite his words, the sheriff's expression was concerned rather than angry. "Charlie said you've got a doctor needs to get to Bayside." "Yes, sir. Emergency surgery for a child. We're running out of time." The sheriff nodded. "My Jeep can't pull your truck out in this mud, but I can get the doctor to the hospital." He glanced at his watch. "Might even be faster than trying to free your vehicle first." Alan turned to Dr. Morgan, who had joined them with her briefcase clutched tightly. "Dr. Morgan, Sheriff Patterson, he'll get you to Bayside." Relief flooded her features as she shook the sheriff's hand. "Thank you, we need to hurry." As she climbed into the Jeep, she turned back to Alan. "Mr. Foster, Alan, thank you for everything you've done. You risked so much to help me, to help Zachary." Alan nodded, rain streaming down his face. "Just get to that boy, Doctor. Save him." The sheriff put the Jeep in gear. "I'll radio for someone to come back for you once we've got the doctor delivered. Foster, might be a few hours though." "We'll be fine," Alan assured him, already stepping back. "Jackson and I have weathered worse." As the Jeep's taillights disappeared into the storm, Alan returned to his truck, soaked to the skin, and suddenly aware of the ache in his back from the tension of the drive. Jackson greeted him with a concerned whine and a lick to his cold hand. "It's all right, boy," Alan said, settling back into the driver's seat. "Nothing to do now but wait." He looked at the clock on the dashboard, 7:43 p.m. By now, Rebecca would be worried sick, probably calling his cell phone that had lost service miles back. As the storm continued to rage around them, Alan closed his eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer for the unknown boy Zachary, for Dr. Morgan's steady hands, and for the journey that had brought them all together on this stormy night. Whatever trouble waited for him back at Foster's Towing, whatever expenses this detour would add to his already strained finances, he knew he had made the only choice possible. The long wait began, with only the sound of rain on the roof and Jackson's steady breathing beside him. It was nearly midnight when Alan finally pulled his tow truck into the driveway of his small house on the outskirts of Woodhaven. The storm had relented somewhat, though rain still fell steadily from the dark sky. His clothes were mud-stained and damp, his muscles aching from the hours spent digging his truck out of the mire after the local fire department had finally reached him around 10. The porch light was on, and before he could even cut the engine, the front door flew open. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her 16-year-old face tight with worry. "Dad," she called, rushing out into the rain with no regard for getting wet. "Where have you been? I've been calling and calling." Alan climbed stiffly from the truck, Jackson jumping down behind him. "Sorry, Becca. Got caught in the storm. No cell service." He embraced his daughter, feeling a pang of guilt at the fear in her eyes. "Everything okay here?" Rebecca pulled back, her expression shifting from relief to annoyance in the way only teenagers could manage. "We lost power for 3 hours. The basement started flooding, but Brian and I got it under control." As if summoned by his name, Alan's son appeared in the doorway. At 20, Brian had their mother's lean build, but Alan's serious eyes. "You're 5 hours late, Dad. We thought something happened to you." The unspoken fear hung between them, the fear that had lingered since Marie's sudden death 10 years ago, that someday Alan might not come home either. "I'm sorry," Alan said again, feeling the weight of their worry. "Had to help someone get to the hospital in Bayside. Emergency situation." He trudged up the porch steps, his sodden boots leaving muddy prints. "I'll tell you all about it, but first I need dry clothes and something hot to drink." Inside, the modest living room bore evidence of the storm. Towels spread beneath a leaking window, candles ready on the coffee table. The house smelled of the beef stew that had been their standard dad's working late meal since the children were small. While Alan changed, Brian heated leftover stew in the microwave, and Rebecca set out mugs for tea. The familiar routine was comforting after the chaos of the evening. As they settled around the small kitchen table, Alan recounted the events of the night: Dr. Morgan's stranded car, the emergency surgery, the desperate race against time and elements. "So you risked your job and nearly got yourself killed to help some doctor you didn't even know." Brian's tone held a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "There was a kid involved," Alan said simply, as if that explained everything. "And to him it did." Rebecca studied her father with thoughtful eyes. "What happened to the boy, Zachary? Did Dr. Morgan make it in time?" Alan shook his head. "Don't know. By the time I got back to cell service, it was too late to call the hospital." He glanced at the kitchen clock. 12:37 a.m. "Guess I'll find out tomorrow." "You mean today?" Brian corrected, nodding at the time. "And you've got work in 5 hours." Reminder sent a jolt of anxiety through Alan. Charlie had texted him earlier. Frank expected him in his office first thing in the morning. No details, but the implication was clear. His job might be on the line. "I'll manage," Alan said with more confidence than he felt. "You two should get some sleep. School tomorrow, right, Becca?" Rebecca nodded, though her eyes remained concerned. "Dad, if Frank gives you trouble over this, it'll be fine," Alan insisted, standing to rinse his mug at the sink. "I've been with that company since before Frank Calloway knew what a tow truck was. He needs experienced drivers." Later, lying in the darkness of his bedroom, Alan was less certain. Foster's Towing wasn't his father's company anymore. Frank had made that abundantly clear since taking over 2 years ago systematically, replacing the old ways with new policies focused on profit margins and service territories. Drivers who didn't meet metrics were let go. Alan had already received 2 warnings about overtime costs. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams filled with rushing water and a child's face he'd never seen. Morning arrived too soon, grey light filtering through the curtains as Alan's alarm blared at 5 a.m. His body protested as he forced himself upright, every muscle remembering yesterday's ordeal. In the kitchen he found a note from Brian, "Made extra coffee, don't get fired. B." The gesture brought a tired smile to Alan's face as he poured the strong brew into his thermos. Jackson watched hopefully from his bed in the corner. "Not today, boy," Alan said, scratching the retriever's ears. "You stay home and rest after our adventure." The morning air was fresh after the storm, though evidence of its fury remained everywhere. Branches down across yards, debris scattered along the roadside. The parking lot at Foster's Towing held several mud-caked vehicles, testimony to the night's rescues. Charlie looked up from the dispatch desk as Alan entered, his expression somewhere between sympathy and alarm. "Morning, Alan. Frank's already here. Been asking when you'd arrive." Alan nodded, hanging his jacket on its hook. Might as well face the music now. Frank Calloway's office had once belonged to Alan's father. Where William Foster had kept family photos and mementos from decades of service, Frank displayed framed profit charts and corporate certificates. The man himself sat behind a glass desk, reviewing something on his computer with a frown creasing. His forehead, "Foster," Frank acknowledged without looking up. "Close the door." Alan did as instructed, taking the seat opposite Frank's desk. He waited, knowing from experience that Frank preferred to dictate the pace of these conversations. "Yesterday's incident report makes for interesting reading," Frank finally said, turning the monitor so Alan could see the form Charlie had evidently completed. "Abandoned service territory, unauthorized extended shift, vehicle damage requiring repair." He leaned back, fixing Alan with a hard stare. "Care to explain?" Alan kept his voice even. "It was an emergency situation, Frank. Dr. Morgan needed to reach Bayside to perform life-saving surgery on a child. And that's somehow the responsibility of Foster's Towing? It's the responsibility of a human being who can help another in danger," Alan countered, feeling heat rise in his chest. Frank's expression remained impassive. "Noble sentiment. Doesn't pay the bills. That detour cost us 3 other service calls that had to be redirected to competitors. The truck repairs. We'll run at least 800, not counting the tow, to get it back from where you abandoned it." "I didn't abandon." Frank held up a hand, cutting him off. "Your actions violated company policy, Alan. This isn't your father's operation anymore. We can't afford to be the county's free rescue service." The reference to his father stung. "So, what are you saying?" Frank sighed, his expression softening fractionally. "You're a good driver, Alan, one of the best, but I can't have employees who don't follow protocol." He pushed a document across the desk. 2 weeks suspension without pay. Consider it a final warning." Alan stared at the paper, calculating quickly what 2 weeks without income would mean for his already precarious finances. The mortgage payment, Brian's tuition installment, his father's care facility, the numbers wouldn't add up. "Frank, I've been with this company for 26 years, Alan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "My father built this business and sold it," Frank finished for him. "Look, I'm running a business here, not a charity. The suspension stands. You can use the time to think about whether you can work within our policies going forward." Knowing further argument was useless, Alan took the paper and stood. "For what it's worth, I'd make the same choice again." Frank's expression was unreadable. "That's what concerns me, Foster." The world felt slightly off-kilter as Alan walked back through the dispatch area. Charlie looked up questioningly, but Alan shook his head slightly, not ready to discuss what had happened. Outside in the parking lot, he leaned against his pickup, trying to process the situation. 2 weeks without pay was a devastating blow. He could pick up some mechanic work at Johnson's garage, maybe, but it wouldn't come close to covering the shortfall. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Brian. "How'd it go with Frank?" Alan stared at the message, unsure how to respond. His children had weathered enough hardship. He hated adding to their burden. Before he could decide on a reply, another call came through, an unknown number with a Bayside area code. "Hello?" he answered, straightening up. "Is this Alan Foster?" A woman's voice, vaguely familiar. Speaking. "Mr. Foster, this is Dr. Melissa Morgan from Bayside Medical Center." The voice became clearer in his mind. The doctor from last night, though sounding far less stressed now. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, it's fine," Alan assured her, curious about why she would be contacting him. "How did you get my number?" "Sheriff Patterson," she replied. "I wanted to thank you properly for your help last night and to tell you that Zachary's surgery was successful. We removed the hematoma and relieved the pressure. His prognosis is excellent." Relief washed over Alan. "That's good news, Doctor, really good news." "It wouldn't have been possible without you," Dr. Morgan continued. "What you did, driving through that storm, finding alternatives when we hit obstacles, it was extraordinary. Zachary's mother wants to thank you personally. Would you be willing to visit the hospital sometime soon?" Alan hesitated, glancing at the suspension notice, still clutched in his other hand. "I actually find myself with some unexpected free time. I could come today, if that works." "Perfect." Dr. Morgan sounded pleased. "Shall we say 2 this afternoon? I'll leave your name at the reception desk." After ending the call, Alan sat in his truck for several minutes, emotions conflicting within him. Satisfaction at knowing the boy was safe, anxiety about the financial hit of the suspension, and curiosity about this invitation to the hospital. At home, he found Rebecca at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around her, as she worked on assignments for the school day she'd apparently decided to skip. "Shouldn't you be in second period by now?" Alan asked, hanging his keys on the hook by the door. Rebecca looked up, instantly reading his expression. "What happened? Did Frank fire you?" "Not fired, suspended. 2 weeks without pay." Alan saw no point in sugarcoating it. Rebecca had grown up too fast after her mother's death. She could handle the truth. "Because you helped that doctor?" "That's so unfair." Rebecca's indignation was fierce. "You literally helped save a child's life." Alan sank into a chair across from her. "Frank's running a business, not a rescue service. I broke the rules." "Rules that say you shouldn't help people in emergencies?" "It's more complicated than that, Becca." He sighed, rubbing his face. "Anyway, I just got a call from Dr. Morgan. The surgery was successful. The boy, Zachary, he's going to be fine." Rebecca's anger gave way to a small smile. "That's good. At least something worked out." She hesitated, then asked tentatively, "What are we going to do about money for 2 weeks?" The directness of the question hit Alan like a physical blow. His children shouldn't have to worry about such things. "I'll pick up some mechanical work. We've got some savings. We'll manage." Rebecca nodded, though her expression remained concerned. "I could ask about more hours at the library." "Absolutely not," Alan said firmly. "Your job is school. Speaking of which, why aren't you there now?" Rebecca gestured to the textbooks. "AP chemistry test prep. Mrs. Sanford let me study at home since I'm ahead." She eyed him suspiciously. "You're changing the subject." Alan smiled despite himself. Guilty. "Look, Dr. Morgan invited me to visit the hospital this afternoon. Apparently, Zachary's mother wants to thank me." "Are you going?" "Thought I might." "Want to come along? We could pick up Brian after his morning class." Rebecca considered this, then nodded. Yeah, I'd like to meet them, see what all this drama was about. The drive to Bayside Medical Center that afternoon felt vastly different from the desperate journey of the previous night. With Rebecca beside him and Brian in the back seat, Alan navigated the now calm roads under clear skies. Evidence of the storm remained. Crews working to clear fallen trees, utility trucks parked beside damaged power lines. But the crisis atmosphere had dissipated. So Frank just suspended you without even considering the circumstances? Brian asked, leaning forward between the front seats. He'd been quietly fuming since Alan had picked him up from his engineering class at the community college. He considered. Them, Alan replied, keeping his eyes on the road. He just didn't find them compelling enough to ignore company policy. It's still wrong, Rebecca insisted. You should talk to a lawyer or something. Alan shook his head. It's his company, his rules. I knew the risks when I made the decision. Would you make the same choice again? Brian asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Alan thought of Dr. Morgan's voice on the phone, telling him that Zachary would recover. Without hesitation. They arrived at Bayside Medical Center shortly before 2 o'clock. The modern facility stood in stark contrast to Woodhaven's small community hospital, with its gleaming glass entrance and sprawling parking complex. At the reception desk, Alan gave his name and was immediately handed visitor badges for all three of them. Dr. Morgan is expecting you, the receptionist explained. 7th floor, pediatric surgical recovery. The elevator ride was silent, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts. Alan felt strangely nervous, unsure what awaited him. The sterile hospital corridors brought back uncomfortable memories of Marie's final days, and he had to consciously push those thoughts aside. Dr. Morgan was waiting at the nurse's station, dressed in surgical scrubs under a white coat, her hair pulled back. Neatly, she looked remarkably composed compared to their last encounter, though shadows under her eyes suggested she hadn't gotten much rest. Mr. Foster, she greeted him with a warm smile, extending her hand. I'm so glad you could come. She nodded to Brian and Rebecca. And you brought your family. My children, Alan confirmed. Brian and Rebecca, hope that's all right. Of course. Zachary and his mother will be delighted to meet all of you. She gestured for them to follow her down the corridor. Zachary's doing remarkably well. Children have an amazing capacity for recovery. She paused outside a room with cheerful decorations on the door. I should prepare you. He still has quite a bit of swelling and bandaging, but he's alert and responsive, which is exactly what we want to see. Inside the room, a small figure lay propped up in a hospital bed, his head wrapped in bandages. Despite this, the boy's eyes were bright and curious as they entered. Beside him sat a woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s, exhaustion etched in her face, but relief evident in her smile. Rebecca, this is Zachary Phillips and his mother Amanda, Dr. Morgan introduced them. This is Alan Foster, the tow truck driver I told you about, and his children, Brian and Rebecca. Amanda Phillips stood immediately, moving toward Alan with outstretched hands. Mr. Foster, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't even know how to begin thanking you. Alan felt a flush of embarrassment at her gratitude. Really, I just drove through some bad weather. Dr. Morgan did the actual saving. Dr. Morgan says you risked your job and your safety to get her here in time, Amanda insisted, still holding his hands. The local doctors said Zachary had maybe 3 hours. Before, she glanced back at her son, leaving the sentence unfinished. You're a hero, Mr. Foster, whether you acknowledge it or not. From the bed, Zachary spoke up, his voice small but clear. Did you really drive through the hurricane to bring my doctor? Alan smiled, moving closer to the bed. It wasn't quite a hurricane, but it was a pretty serious storm. Cool, Zachary declared with the simple appreciation of an 8-year-old. Mom says you saved my life. Your doctor saved your life, Alan corrected gently. I just helped her get to work on time. Zachary considered this, then asked, do you rescue people a lot? In your tow truck? The question caught Alan off guard. Sometimes, I guess. Mostly I just help people with car troubles. Still a rescue, Zachary insisted, with the certainty of childhood logic. As they continued chatting, Dr. Morgan drew Brian and Rebecca into conversation, explaining Zachary's condition, in terms they could understand. Alan noticed how intently Brian listened to the medical details, asking surprisingly knowledgeable questions about the surgical procedure. After about 20 minutes, Dr. Morgan gently reminded them that Zachary needed rest. As they prepared to leave, Amanda Phillips pressed a card into Alan's hand. My contact information, she explained. Please keep in touch. I'd like to thank you properly when we're out of the hospital. In the hallway outside, Dr. Morgan turned to Alan with an expression he couldn't quite read. There's someone else who'd like to meet you, if you have a few more minutes. Alan exchanged glances with his children, who both nodded their agreement. Sure, we're in no rush. Dr. Morgan led them to an elevator and used a key card to access the top floor. The administrative section, she explained as they ascended. My father wants to talk with you. Your father? Alan repeated, confused. The elevator doors opened to reveal an elegantly appointed reception area, distinctly different from the clinical floors below. A professional-looking assistant greeted Dr. Morgan immediately. They're expecting you in the conference room, Doctor. Dr. Morgan nodded her thanks and guided Alan and his children down a corridor lined with framed photographs showing the hospital at various stages of development. She paused before a set of double doors. My father is Thomas Blackwell, founder of Blackwell Medical Devices, she explained, noting Alan's surprised expression. And yes, Blackwell as in this hospital's cardiac center. The company's headquarters are here in Bayside. Before Alan could process this information, she opened the doors to reveal a spacious conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. At the table sat a distinguished-looking man in his late 60s, reviewing documents with focused attention. Father, Dr. Morgan called softly. This is Alan Foster and his children. Thomas Blackwell looked up, his keen gaze immediately assessing the newcomers. He stood with the careful movements of someone managing chronic pain, but his handshake was firm as he greeted them. Mr. Foster, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I've heard quite a remarkable story about you from my daughter. Alan shifted uncomfortably, unused to such attention. Just did what anyone would do, sir. A slight smile crossed Blackwell's face. We both know that's not true. Please sit down, all of you. As they settled around the conference table, Blackwell studied them with undisguised interest. Melissa tells me you've worked as a tow truck driver for over 25 years. Originally your family's business. Alan nodded, wondering where this conversation was heading. My father founded Foster's Towing, had to sell it a few years back due to medical expenses. And now you've been suspended for helping my daughter reach a critical surgery, Blackwell stated matter-of-factly. Alan blinked in surprise. She told you that? The sheriff did, actually. Dave Patterson and I go back many years. Blackwell's expression grew thoughtful. 2 weeks without pay, I understand. Significant hardship for a family? The directness of the question was startling. Alan felt Brian and Rebecca tense beside him. We'll manage, he said firmly, unwilling to discuss his financial difficulties with this stranger, however distinguished. Blackwell seemed to respect his reticence. Mr. Foster, I didn't ask you here to pry into your personal affairs or to offer charity. I asked you here because people of character and principle are rare, and when I encounter them, I take notice. He lifted a folder from the table. This contains a proposition I'd like you to consider. Blackwell Medical Devices is launching a new initiative focused on emergency medical transport solutions for rural communities. The incident with my daughter has highlighted certain gaps in our current thinking. I believe someone with your practical experience could provide valuable insight. Alan accepted the folder with confusion. I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Blackwell. I'm a tow truck driver, not a medical professional. Precisely, Blackwell nodded, as if Alan had made his point for him. You understand road conditions, vehicle limitations, and practical problem-solving in crisis situations. That's expertise we need. Dr. Morgan spoke up from where she'd taken a seat beside her father. What my father is trying to say, Mr. Foster, is that we'd like to offer you a position consulting on our Rural Medical Access Project. It would involve evaluating transportation challenges in communities like Woodhaven and helping design solutions that could improve emergency response times. Alan stared at them both, speechless. Beside him, he could feel Brian and Rebecca's shocked attention. The position comes with a significant stipend, Blackwell continued, and would not necessarily require you to leave your current employment, though after yesterday's events, perhaps a change might be welcome. He gestured to the folder in Alan's hands. All the details are in there, including compensation and expectations. I don't require an answer today. Take it home, review it with your family. Alan's mind raced with questions. This unexpected turn felt almost dreamlike after the difficulties of the past 24 hours. Why me? Surely there are professionals with training in this field. Because you didn't weigh profit margins against a child's life, Blackwell said simply. Because you found solutions where others would have seen only obstacles. He leaned forward slightly. And because Zachary Phillips is my grandson. The revelation hung in the air for a moment before Alan connected the pieces. Amanda Phillips, my daughter-in-law, Blackwell confirmed, though we've been estranged for some years following my son's death. Zachary is my only grandchild. Dr. Morgan touched her father's arm gently. We don't need to burden Mr. Foster with family history, Father. Blackwell nodded, composing himself. Indeed. The point, Mr. Foster, is that your actions have personal significance to me beyond their obvious merit. But I want to be clear. This is not about gratitude or debt. This is a business proposition based on recognizing the value you could bring to our project. Alan looked down at the folder in his hands, then at his children's expectant faces. I'll need to think about this, Mr. Blackwell. It's unexpected. Of course, Blackwell agreed. Take whatever time you need. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. One more thing, Mr. Foster. There will be a gathering at my home this Friday evening. Key stakeholders in the Rural Medical Access Project will be attending. I'd be honored if you and your children would join us. Informal, of course. An opportunity to meet the team and ask questions before making your decision. As they rode the elevator back down to the main floor, Alan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Brian and Rebecca remained uncharacteristically silent, processing what they'd just witnessed. Outside in the parking lot, Rebecca finally broke the silence. Dad, are you going to take it? Whatever it is? Alan shook his head, still dazed. I don't even know what it is yet, Becca. Need to read through this first. He patted the folder. Brian's expression was calculating. Blackwell Medical Devices is a multi-billion-dollar company, Dad. Whatever they're offering, it's got to be better than getting suspended for helping people. Maybe, Alan conceded, starting the truck. But there's a lot to consider. This is all happening very fast. As they pulled out of the hospital parking lot, Alan glanced in the rearview mirror at the impressive building behind them. Yesterday, he'd been a tow truck driver racing against time and elements. Today, he held a folder that might contain an entirely different future. The weight of the decision pressed on him as they headed back toward Woodhaven, where a silent house and mounting bills awaited. Whatever lay in that folder represented more. than just a job offer. It was a crossroads, unexpected and momentous, arrived at through a simple choice to help a stranded motorist on a stormy night. The folder sat unopened on Alan's kitchen table for nearly 2 hours after they returned home from Bayside. He moved around it like it was a live thing, preparing dinner, answering Rebecca's questions about homework, all while the unmarked manila envelope occupied the center of their lives like an uninvited guest. "Are you going to open it tonight or just stare at it until it hatches?" Brian finally asked, setting down his textbook. He'd been pretending to study engineering calculations, but Alan had noticed his son's eyes drifting to the folder every few minutes. "I'm not staring at it," Alan protested, though he knew Brian was right. The truth was, he felt unequipped to evaluate whatever lay inside. Contracts, proposals, terminology from a world entirely separate from tow trucks and roadside assistance. Rebecca abandoned her own pretense of reading and pulled out the chair beside her father. "Want me to open it for you?" The offer, made with such earnest simplicity, broke through Alan's hesitation. "No, honey, I can do it." He reached for the folder, aware that both his children were watching with barely disguised anticipation. Inside was a surprisingly slim document, just 4 pages of clear, concise text outlining the proposed position. Transportation Logistics Consultant for the Rural Medical Access Initiative. The salary figure at the bottom of the first page made Alan blink twice to ensure he wasn't misreading. "Is that per month?" he asked, pointing to the number. Brian leaned over his shoulder and let out a low whistle. "That's the annual figure, Dad. It's about 4 times what you make at Foster's Towing." The revelation settled over them in stunned silence. This wasn't just a job offer, it was financial salvation, an immediate end to the constant juggling of bills and choices between necessities. "There's more," Rebecca pointed to the next page. "Housing assistance, educational grants." Alan flipped through the remaining documents. A description of the initiative itself, focused on bringing specialized medical care to underserved rural communities through innovative transportation solutions. An outline of responsibilities that would use Alan's practical knowledge of local road systems and emergency response challenges. And finally, a personal note from Thomas Blackwell. "Mr. Foster," it read in elegant handwriting. "This offer comes with no obligation related to my grandson's care. It is extended based solely on the qualities you demonstrated and the expertise you possess. However, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that your actions have affected me personally, and that has brought your capabilities to my attention. The decision to join our team should be based on your own interest in the work and the opportunity it presents for you and your family. Sincerely, Thomas Blackwell." Alan set the note down, strangely moved by Blackwell's candor. "Dad," Brian spoke first, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "this could change everything. My tuition, Rebecca's college fund, Grandpa's care." "I know," Alan said quietly. "Then what's holding you back?" Rebecca challenged, always the more direct of his children. "Is it because it feels like charity? Because Blackwell made it pretty clear it's not?" Alan shook his head, trying to articulate the unease he felt. "It's not that. It's..." He gestured vaguely around their small kitchen, the home that held all their memories. This would mean changes, big ones, different work, maybe even moving eventually. "I've been a tow truck driver my whole adult life. It's what I know." Understanding softened Rebecca's expression. "You're scared." The simple truth of it caught Alan off guard. He was scared of failing in this new role, of disappointing his children. If the opportunity wasn't what it seemed, of stepping away from the familiar path he'd walked for decades. "It's okay to be scared, Dad," Brian said with surprising gentleness. "But don't let that keep you from something that could be really good. For all of us." Alan looked between his children, suddenly seeing them with new clarity. They had grown so much since Marie's death. Brian with his quiet steadiness, Rebecca with her fierce determination. They had weathered change and loss already. Perhaps they were stronger than he gave them credit for. "The dinner," he said finally. "Blackwell invited us to meet his team on Friday. Let's go, ask our questions, then decide. Fair enough?" Both children nodded, relief evident in their expressions. They at least would have the chance to see this possibility up close before it slipped away. The next morning, Alan woke early from habit, momentarily forgetting his suspension until he reached for his work clothes. The realization hit him anew. 2 weeks without pay, the looming bills, the uncertain future. But now there was also the folder, containing a potential escape from these constant pressures. He made coffee and sat on the porch steps, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Jackson settled beside him, the retriever's grey muzzle resting on his knee. "Big changes coming, boy," Alan murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "One way or another." His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Amanda Phillips. "Zachary's being discharged tomorrow. He's asked about you. Would you visit before we leave?" The message brought an unexpected warmth. In the chaos of yesterday's revelations, he'd almost forgotten the most important outcome. A child who would recover, who would grow up, because a series of people, Alan included, had made the right choices at critical moments. He texted back his agreement to visit that afternoon. Whether he took Blackwell's offer or not, he wanted to see Zachary one more time, to cement in his mind that the risk and sacrifice had been worthwhile. After his children left for school and college, Alan found himself at loose ends, unaccustomed to weekday freedom. The house felt too quiet, too empty. On impulse, he grabbed his keys and headed for Pine Valley Care Center. If he couldn't work, he could at least spend more time with his father than his usual rushed lunch visits. William Foster was having one of his good days. He sat in the small courtyard, watching birds at the feeder with clear, focused eyes. He recognized Alan immediately. "Twice in 1 week," William remarked as Alan took the seat beside him. "Either you're avoiding work or something's wrong." Alan smiled at his father's perceptiveness. Even with his condition's progression, William still had moments of sharp clarity. Little of both, actually. He explained the suspension briefly, then to his own surprise found himself describing Blackwell's offer. William listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded in his lap. When Alan finished, his father was quiet for so long that Alan wondered if he'd drifted away mentally, as often happened these days. Finally, William spoke, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Your grandfather drove a milk truck. I built a towing company. You think we didn't face choices and changes?" He fixed Alan with a steady gaze. "The work isn't who you are, son. It's what you do to take care of the people you love." The simple truth of it struck Alan forcefully. His father, in one of his moments of clarity, had distilled the situation to its essence. "You're right," Alan acknowledged. "I've been thinking about this all wrong." William nodded, satisfied. "Blackwell's a good man. Known of him for years. Built his first prototypes in a garage not much bigger than ours." He patted Alan's hand. "Don't let pride stand in the way of providing. That's the real Foster tradition." Later, as Alan drove to Bayside Medical Center, his father's words echoed in his mind. "The work isn't who you are." He'd defined himself as a tow truck driver for so long, the identity bound up in grease-stained hands and late-night rescues. But perhaps that had never been the core of who he was. At the hospital, he found Zachary sitting up in bed, the bandages reduced from yesterday, playing a video game with focused concentration. Amanda looked up as Alan entered, her face brightening. "Mr. Foster, thank you for coming." She stood to greet him, looking more rested than the day before. "Zachary's been asking when you'd visit again." The boy looked up from his game, grinning. "Hi, Mr. Foster. Look, they took off the big bandages." He pointed to his head, where smaller dressings now covered the surgical site. "Looking good, buddy," Alan said, taking the chair beside the bed. "I hear you're busting out of here tomorrow." "Yep, Doc says I'm healing super fast." Zachary set his game aside. "Mom says you might come work with Grandpa Thomas, is that true?" Alan shot a surprised glance at Amanda, who looked slightly embarrassed. "Father-in-law called this morning," she explained. "He's excited about the possibility." "I'm still deciding," Alan told Zachary, uncomfortable with the boy's evident enthusiasm. "It would be a big change." "But you'd be helping other kids, like me, right?" Zachary persisted. "Mom explained it. You'd help doctors get to sick people faster." Put that way, the purpose of the position crystallized for Alan in a way the formal description hadn't quite captured. "That's the idea, yes." "That's even cooler than driving a tow truck," Zachary declared with absolute certainty. Alan found himself smiling at the boy's simple perspective. "Maybe you're right about that." They chatted a while longer about Zachary's recovery, his plans once he returned home, and his excitement about having his grandfather back in his life. Alan observed the subtle shift in Amanda's demeanor when Thomas Blackwell was mentioned, a mixture of gratitude and residual tension that hinted at a complicated history. As he prepared to leave, Amanda walked him to the elevator. "I want to thank you again," she said quietly, away from Zachary's hearing, "not just for what you did during the storm, but for considering Thomas's offer. It means a lot to him to find a way to address the issues that nearly cost Zachary his life." "I haven't decided yet," Alan reminded her. Amanda nodded. "I know. And honestly, that's part of why I think you're the right person. You're weighing this carefully, considering your family, not just jumping at money or opportunity." She hesitated, then added, "Thomas told me about your suspension. I'm so sorry that helping us cost you like that." "It was the right thing to do," Alan said simply, no regrets. As he drove home, Alan found his perspective shifting. Each conversation with his children, his father, Zachary, and Amanda had illuminated different facets of the decision before him. The question was no longer whether he should consider Blackwell's offer, but rather how to approach this unexpected turn with wisdom and care. Friday evening arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervousness in the Foster household. Alan had never seen his children so attentive to their appearance. Brian, in the one dress shirt he owned from a cousin's wedding 2 years prior. Rebecca, in a modest blue dress she'd borrowed from a friend. "It's not a formal event," Alan reminded them as they fussed with their clothes. Blackwell said casual. "Casual for billionaires might be different than casual for us, Dad," Rebecca pointed out, adjusting her earrings. Alan couldn't argue with that logic. He'd settled on clean jeans and his newest button-down shirt, striving for a balance between respectability and authenticity. He wasn't going to pretend to be someone he wasn't. The drive to Blackwell's home took them through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until they reached an electronically controlled gate set into a stone wall. Alan gave his name to the intercom, feeling distinctly out of place as the gate swung, open to reveal a winding driveway leading to a sprawling house overlooking the valley. "Whoa," Brian murmured from the back seat. "This is intense." A valet appeared as they pulled up to the circular driveway, where several luxury vehicles were already parked. Alan handed over his keys with some reluctance, self-conscious about his 15-year-old pickup among the gleaming SUVs. Thomas Blackwell himself greeted them at the door, dressed in casual slacks and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Alan's entire wardrobe. "Mr. Foster, right on time. And Brian and Rebecca, yes? Welcome to my home." The interior was impressive without being ostentatious, high ceilings, tasteful art, and wide windows capturing the stunning valley view. About 20 people mingled in the spacious living area, some in conversation clusters, others examining what appeared to be medical device prototypes displayed on pedestals throughout the room. "Let me introduce you to some key members of the team," Blackwell said, guiding them into the gathering. "Dr. Harrison oversees our medical research division, and this is Senator Wallace, who chairs the Rural Healthcare Advocacy Committee." Alan shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, acutely aware of the distinguished credentials surrounding him. Everyone was welcoming, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being a fish far from its familiar waters. Rebecca and Brian had no such hesitation. Within minutes, Brian was deep in conversation with a biomedical engineer about emergency vehicle modifications, while Rebecca questioned a public health specialist about disparities in rural medical access. Alan felt a surge of pride watching his children navigate this unfamiliar social terrain with confidence. "They're impressive young people," Dr. Morgan commented, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of sparkling water. She handed one to Alan. "Intelligence and social poise often skip a generation, but not in your family." "They take after their mother," Alan said, accepting the drink gratefully. "She was the one with all the social graces." Dr. Morgan's expression softened. "You lost her some time ago?" 10 years in September. Cancer. The words still carried weight, though the sharp edges of grief had rounded with time. "I'm sorry." Her sympathy seemed genuine, not the perfunctory response he'd grown accustomed to. "My mother passed when I was in medical school. It changes you, doesn't it? Especially when it's unexpected." Before Alan could respond, Blackwell called for the group's attention, standing near the center of the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. As you know, the Rural Medical Access Initiative represents a significant expansion of Blackwell Medical's mission." He gestured toward Alan. "Recent events have highlighted the critical need for our work. When my grandson needed emergency neurosurgery, the difference between positive outcome and tragedy came down to one individual's dedication and problem-solving skills." Alan felt uncomfortably conspicuous as heads turned his direction. Mr. Foster's actions that night, navigating flooded roads, finding alternative routes, ensuring my daughter reached the hospital in time, exemplify exactly the kind of practical expertise our initiative requires. The challenges of rural healthcare aren't just about medical technology. They're about overcoming physical barriers to access. Blackwell continued, outlining the initiative's goals: specialized medical transport vehicles, communication systems that functioned in remote areas, partnerships with local emergency services in rural counties. It was an ambitious vision, tackling problems Alan had witnessed firsthand throughout his years on Woodhaven's roads. After the presentation, guests broke into discussion groups. Alan found himself surrounded by people genuinely interested in his perspective on rural transportation challenges, questions about seasonal road conditions, communication dead zones, the limitations of existing emergency vehicles. For the first time that evening, he felt on solid ground, speaking with authority about issues he understood intimately. These highly educated professionals were listening to him, a tow truck driver with a high school diploma, with genuine respect for his practical knowledge. As the evening progressed, Alan observed Thomas Blackwell with his team. Not a dictatorial leader, but someone who fostered collaboration and valued diverse perspectives. He noticed how Blackwell would sometimes press a hand to his lower back when standing for long periods, managing pain without drawing attention to it. Around 9 o'clock, as the gathering began to disperse, Blackwell beckoned Alan to follow him. "There's something I'd like to show you, if you have a few minutes." They walked down a hallway to a wood-paneled study where Blackwell unlocked a display cabinet and carefully removed what looked like a medical device about the size of a small briefcase. "The first Blackwell portable cardiac monitor," he explained, setting it on his desk. "I built it in my garage in 1984 after my father died of a heart attack while hunting in a remote area. The doctors said he might have survived if they'd reached him sooner, or if first responders had had better diagnostic equipment." Alan studied the device, recognizing the significance of Blackwell sharing this personal history. "I was an electrical engineer with no medical training," Blackwell continued. "Everyone said I was wasting my time, that medical devices required specialized knowledge I didn't possess." A small smile crossed his face. They weren't entirely wrong. The first 3 prototypes failed spectacularly, but I persisted because I understood something they didn't. The problem wasn't just medical, it was practical. Remote areas needed technology designed specifically for their challenges. He carefully returned the device to its cabinet. "The Rural Medical Access Initiative comes from the same understanding. We have brilliant doctors and engineers, but we need people who comprehend the practical realities of rural emergency response. People like you, Mr. Foster." Alan absorbed this, seeing the parallels Blackwell was drawing. "I appreciate your confidence, sir, but I'm still not sure what I could really contribute." "You already have contributed," Blackwell countered. "The questions you asked tonight about road maintenance schedules affecting response times, the insights about communication system vulnerabilities during storms, those perspectives aren't in our current planning documents, but they need to be." He moved to sit behind his desk, gesturing for Alan to take the chair opposite. "I won't pressure you for an answer tonight, but I will ask, what's holding you back? After everything you've seen and heard this evening, what concerns remain?" The direct question deserved a direct answer. "Honestly, I'm worried about failing. This is so far outside my experience. What if I can't deliver what you're expecting?" Blackwell nodded, unsurprised. "A reasonable concern. Let me propose something, a 3-month trial period. You work with us part-time, 3 days a week. Maintain your position at the towing company if you wish, though I suspect after your suspension ends, you might find that relationship strained." The suggestion made practical sense, offering a safer transition than an immediate full commitment. "That could work," Alan acknowledged. "Excellent. Dr. Harrison can work out the details with you next week." Blackwell stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "One more thing, Mr. Foster. I've observed your children this evening. They're exceptional young people. Brian's questions about our emergency vehicle prototypes showed remarkable insight, and Rebecca's understanding of rural healthcare disparities is sophisticated for her age." "They're smart kids," Alan agreed, pride evident in his voice. "More than smart. They're engaged, thoughtful, and clearly well-raised despite difficult circumstances." Blackwell paused at the study door. "The educational grants mentioned in your offer, they're not contingent on your acceptance of the position. Regardless of your decision, I'd like to ensure both your children have the opportunity to pursue their obvious potential without financial constraints." The unexpected generosity left Alan momentarily speechless. "Mr. Blackwell, I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider the position on its merits without your children's education weighing in the balance." Blackwell replied simply, "That's all I ask." As they rejoined the remaining guests, Alan spotted Rebecca deep in conversation with Dr. Morgan, while Brian examined a prototype with one of the engineers. Both looked completely in their element, animated and engaged in ways he rarely saw at home. On the drive back to Woodhaven, the car buzzed with excited conversation. Brian couldn't stop talking about the emergency vehicle designs. while Rebecca enthused about Dr. Morgan's research on neurosurgical access in underserved communities. "Dad, these people are doing amazing work," Brian said earnestly. "And they actually want your input. That's huge." Rebecca leaned forward from the back seat. "Did you talk to Dr. Morgan about her mother? She told me they lost her suddenly too. She really gets it, the whole single-parent struggle thing." Alan nodded, processing everything from the evening, the warm reception, the genuine interest in his perspective, Blackwell's unexpected offer regarding his children's education. "It was definitely not what I expected." "So? Are you going to take the job?" Rebecca pressed, never one to circle a question. Alan glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, then at his son beside him. Blackwell suggested a trial period, 3 months part-time. See if it's a good fit before committing fully. "That's perfect," Brian exclaimed. "Low risk, but gives you a real chance to see if you like the work." "And you?" Alan asked. "How would you both feel about the changes this would bring?" "Different schedule, maybe eventually relocating closer to Bayside." His children exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. It was Rebecca who answered first. "Dad, we've watched you work yourself to exhaustion for years, taking every extra shift, never complaining, even when Frank treats you like dirt. Maybe it's time something good happened for you, for all of us." Brian nodded in agreement. "Mom would want this for you, Dad. A chance to do something meaningful, something that values what you know." As they crested the final hill before Woodhaven, the small town spread out below them, lights twinkling in the valley darkness. Alan had spent his entire life in those few square miles, his world defined by familiar roads and faces. The prospect of expanding that world was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I think," he said slowly, "that it's time for a change." The decision once made felt right, like finding the correct path after being lost in the woods. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments and learning curves, but also possibilities that hadn't existed before that stormy night when a desperate doctor knocked on his window. As they pulled into their driveway, Alan noticed something unusual. Lights on in the house they'd left dark. Then he spotted the vehicles parked along the street. Sheriff Patterson's personal Jeep, Charlie's motorcycle, and several other familiar cars belonging to friends and neighbors. "What's going on?" Rebecca asked, voicing the question in all their minds. They approached the front door cautiously, Alan leading the way. The sound of conversation drifted from inside, along with laughter and the clink of glasses. He opened the door to find his living room filled with people. Sheriff Patterson, Charlie from dispatch, neighbors, friends from church, even Mrs. Henderson, whose car he'd jumped countless times. "Surprise!" they called in cheerful unison. Charlie stepped forward, grinning sheepishly. "Word got around about what you did during the storm, Alan, and about Frank suspending you for it. We thought you could use a reminder of how much this community values you." Alan stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the unexpected show of support. Sheriff Patterson approached, clapping him on the shoulder. "That boy you helped save, his picture's been in the Bayside newspaper. You're something of a local hero, Foster, whether you like it or not." As neighbors pressed drinks into their hands and surrounded them with warmth and conversation, Alan caught Brian and Rebecca exchanging satisfied smiles. Whatever path lay ahead with Blackwell's offer, this moment affirmed something vital. They were part of a community that recognized and valued what truly mattered. The contrast wasn't lost on Alan, from Blackwell's elegant home to his modest living room, from distinguished professionals to hard-working neighbors. Different worlds, yet connected by the same fundamental understanding. The measure of a person lay not in their credentials or circumstances, but in their willingness to help others when it truly counted. Monday morning found Alan standing in Frank Calloway's office for the second time in a week, though under vastly different circumstances. Instead of facing disciplinary action, he was submitting his formal notice to reduce his hours to part-time. The weekend's community gathering had strengthened his resolve, and a Sunday phone call with Thomas Blackwell had finalized the details of the 3-month trial period. Frank leaned back in his chair, surprise evident on his face. Part-time? I thought you'd be asking me to cancel the suspension, maybe arguing for your job back. I'm still happy to work here, Alan explained, but I've been offered a consulting position with Blackwell Medical Devices. 3 days a week to start. Blackwell? Frank's eyebrows rose. Because of that doctor you transported during the storm? Alan nodded. They're starting an initiative to improve emergency medical access in rural areas. They wanted someone with practical knowledge of the transportation challenges. Frank was silent for a moment, seemingly reassessing the man standing before him. So instead of firing you, I should be thanking you for still being willing to work here at all. I'm not. Here to make things difficult, Frank. I've been with this company my entire adult life. But yes, my situation has changed, Frank sighed, tapping his pen against the desk. What days were you thinking? Mondays and Fridays here, Tuesday through Thursday at Blackwell. Frank considered this, then nodded slowly. We can make that work. Charlie's nephew needs more hours anyway. He extended his hand across the desk. Congratulations, Foster. Seems you fell in a pile of manure and came up smelling like roses. Alan accepted the handshake with a small smile. Just made a choice anyone would have made in the circumstances. No, Frank countered, surprising Alan with his candor. Not anyone. That's the point. By Wednesday, Alan found himself in a modern office building in downtown Bayside, being issued a security badge and shown to a modest workspace in the research wing of Blackwell Medical Devices headquarters, the administrative assistant guiding. Him, a pleasant woman named Diane, explained the basic logistics, parking access, cafeteria location, computer logins. You're scheduled for a team meeting at 10 in conference room B, Diane informed him, pointing down a corridor lined with glass-walled meeting spaces. Dr. Harrison and the project leads are eager to start incorporating your input into the planning phase. Alan nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Despite the warm welcome, he couldn't shake the sensation of being a fraud about to be exposed. His battered work boots and practical button-down shirt stood in stark contrast to the polished professionals moving efficiently through the hallways. Mr. Foster! Dr. Morgan's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She approached with a tablet tucked under her arm, dressed in a tailored pantsuit rather than the surgical scrubs he associated with her. Welcome to Blackwell. How are you settling? Still finding my bearings, Alan admitted. It's quite different from the towing dispatch office. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. The first day anywhere new is always disorienting. But trust me, you'll be surprised how quickly you adapt. She glanced at her watch. I've got surgery in an hour, but I wanted to stop by and say welcome. Don't let the suits and technical jargon intimidate you. We brought you here precisely because you offer something different from our usual perspective. Her encouragement helped steady him. I appreciate that. Just hope I can contribute something useful. You already have, she assured him. The team's been reviewing your account of our journey during the storm. Your observations about road closure procedures and communication challenges have already prompted several design modifications. Before Alan could respond, her pager beeped. She checked it and grimaced. Duty calls. But we'll catch up soon. There's a patient who's been asking about you. With a quick smile, she was gone, moving with the purposeful stride of someone always needed somewhere urgently. The morning meeting proved less intimidating than Alan had feared. Dr. Harrison, a thoughtful man in his 50s, facilitated introductions. and then immediately drew Alan into the discussion by asking specific questions about emergency vehicle access during different seasonal conditions in Woodhaven County. The spring thaw is actually worse than winter storms in some areas, Alan explained, warming to a subject he knew intimately. Unpaved roads that were passable when frozen become impassable mud traps. Emergency services have to add 15 to 20 minutes to response times for certain addresses. The team listened attentively, engineers taking notes, a GIS specialist marking particular trouble spots on digital maps as Alan identified them. Their respect for his practical knowledge was evident, and by the meeting's end, Alan felt the first genuine stirrings of excitement about the project. We're identifying the worst access points in 3 counties to start, Dr. Harrison explained as they wrapped up. That's where you'll be most valuable initially, Mr. Foster, helping us understand the real-world conditions that our vehicles and systems will need to navigate. As Alan walked to the cafeteria for lunch, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How's the first day going? Wearing fancy shoes yet?" The teasing message made him smile, grateful for his daughter's ability to lighten moments of transition. He was selecting a sandwich when a familiar voice called his name. Thomas Blackwell stood near a corner table, gesturing for Alan to join him. "I hope you don't mind company for lunch. I try to connect with new team members when possible." They settled at the table, Blackwell moving with the careful deliberation that Alan now recognized as management of chronic pain. "First impressions?" Blackwell asked, cutting directly to the point. "Positive," Alan replied honestly. "Everyone's been welcoming. The morning meeting was surprisingly comfortable." Blackwell nodded, satisfied. "I heard you made quite an impression with your assessment of seasonal access challenges. That's exactly why you're here." They talked easily through lunch, Blackwell sharing stories from the company's early days, when skeptical investors doubted the market for portable medical devices. Alan found himself relaxing in the older man's presence, recognizing a straightforward nature similar to his own, despite their vastly different backgrounds. As they finished eating, Blackwell shifted to a more personal topic. "I visited Zachary at Amanda's home yesterday. He asked about you again. Seems you've made quite an impression on my grandson." "He's a special kid," Alan said simply. "How's he recovering?" "Remarkably well. Children's resilience is astonishing." Blackwell's expression softened. "Amanda mentioned you might be willing to bring your children to visit sometime. I think Zachary would enjoy meeting them." "I'm sure they'd like that," Alan agreed, touched by the personal connection extending beyond their professional relationship. Blackwell nodded, then changed subjects. "One other matter. I understand your son, Brian, is studying engineering at the community college?" "Yes, he's in his 2nd year. Plans to transfer to State University next fall if we can manage the tuition. Our engineering department offers internships for promising students," Blackwell said casually. "Paid positions, flexible hours around, class schedules. If Brian's interested, he should submit an application. No guarantees, of course, but we're always looking for fresh perspectives." Alan recognized the opportunity being presented, carefully framed to preserve Brian's dignity and sense of achievement. "I'll let him know. He'd have to apply on his own merits, though. I wouldn't want special consideration." "Naturally," Blackwell agreed, "though I suspect from what I observed Friday night, his merits will speak for themselves." The remainder of Alan's first day passed in a blur of orientations, introductions, and information. By the time he drove home to Woodhaven, his mind was overflowing with new terms, concepts, and possibilities. Yet despite the mental fatigue, he felt a distinct sense of satisfaction, like the feeling after a difficult but successful vehicle recovery when challenges had been met and overcome. At home, he found Brian and Rebecca waiting expectantly, dinner already prepared. a rare occurrence that signaled their investment in this new chapter. "So," Rebecca demanded as soon as he walked through the door, "tell us everything." Over pot roast that Brian had somehow managed not to burn, Alan recounted his day, from the morning's awkwardness to the gradually building confidence of the team meeting, lunch with Blackwell, and the afternoon's orientation sessions. "The internship opportunity sounds perfect," Brian said when Alan mentioned Blackwell's suggestion. "My engineering professor actually recommended applying to Blackwell last semester, but I never thought I'd have a chance." "You should apply," Alan encouraged. "Blackwell said it would be on your own merits. Could be good experience, even if it's just filing papers for engineers." The conversation flowed easily, the three of them more animated than they'd been around the dinner table in years. Alan observed his children with quiet pride, noting how this single opportunity seemed to have expanded their sense of possibility. Later, after Rebecca had retreated to her room to study, Brian lingered in the kitchen, helping Alan with the dishes. "Dad," he began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about something. If this position with Blackwell becomes permanent, have you considered that we might need to move closer to Bayside? The commute is pretty significant." Alan passed his son a plate to dry. "It's crossed my mind. But that would be a big change, especially for you and Rebecca, your school, friends, this house with all our memories. I'm transferring after this semester anyway," Brian reminded him, "and Rebecca's always said the Bayside schools have better science programs. As for the house..." He glanced around the kitchen, taking in the familiar worn countertops and faded curtains that had hung since his mother's time. "Mum would understand. She'd want us to go where the opportunities are." The mature perspective caught Alan by surprise. "When did you get so wise?" Brian shrugged, a hint of his mother's smile crossing his face. "Learned from watching you, I guess. All those years of adapting to whatever got thrown at us." The following weeks established a new rhythm for the Foster family. Alan divided his time between Foster's towing and Blackwell Medical, gradually finding his footing in both worlds. At the towing company, his reduced hours actually improved his relationship with Frank, who seemed to value Alan's contributions more now that they were limited. At Blackwell, his confidence grew as his practical insights repeatedly proved valuable to the development team. Brian submitted his internship application and was called for an interview, returning home with barely contained excitement about the lab facilities and the possibility of hands-on work with prototype emergency vehicles. Rebecca found unexpected mentorship in Dr. Morgan, who invited her to shadow during appropriate hospital rounds after learning of the teenager's interest in medicine. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Alan was reviewing topographical maps with the project team when Dr. Harrison asked him to accompany a group to Woodhaven the following day. "We need to survey some of the access routes you've identified as problematic," the project leader explained. "Having you along to provide context would be invaluable." The next morning, Alan found himself in the passenger seat of a Blackwell company SUV, guiding a team of engineers and medical specialists through the back roads of his home county. What had once been simply the way to the Henderson place or that bad curve by Miller's Creek became critical data points for emergency response planning. "This section floods completely during heavy rain," Alan explained as they paused on a narrow bridge. "No alternate routes for 3 miles in either direction. The Mitchell family lives half a mile up that dirt track. They've had to wait over an hour for ambulances twice in the past year." Dr. Carson, the emergency medicine specialist, made notes with a troubled expression. "With cardiac events or severe trauma, that delay could be fatal." "It has been," Alan confirmed quietly. "Tom Mitchell's father died of a heart attack 3 years ago. Ambulance couldn't get through because of washout right where we're standing." The team exchanged glances, the real-world implications of their work suddenly concrete rather than theoretical. Dr. Harrison placed a hand on Alan's shoulder. "This is exactly why your perspective is essential, Alan. You know the human stories behind the access points. As they continued their survey, stopping at particularly challenging locations around the county, Alan found himself seeing familiar terrain through new eyes, not just as the roads he'd navigated for decades, but as a network of critical pathways, where improvements could directly impact lives. Their final stop was Woodhaven Community Hospital, where Administrator Helen Barnes greeted them in the small conference room. "We're honored to have Blackwell Medical's attention," she said warmly, though Alan detected the weariness behind her professional demeanor. "Our resources are stretched increasingly thin as rural hospitals everywhere struggle to maintain services." Dr. Harrison outlined the initiative's goals. "We're not just focusing on transportation to larger facilities, Ms. Barnes. Part of our mission is enhancing local capabilities through portable diagnostic and treatment equipment. The best outcomes often come from immediate intervention at the closest facility, not just rapid transport to specialized centers." As the medical professionals discussed technological possibilities, Alan noticed maps of Woodhaven County spread across the conference table. One highlighted all emergency calls from the past year, with response times coded by color. Large swathes of the county showed dangerous delays, particularly in the more remote areas where road conditions were poorest. "This is what we're working to change," Dr. Carson said, following Alan's gaze to the map. "Your insights today have already identified priority zones we hadn't fully recognized." The validation of his contribution settled something within Alan. For the first time since accepting Blackwell's offer, he felt not just useful, but essential to the project's success. The bridge between sophisticated medical technology and the practical realities of rural emergency response. That evening, rather than heading straight home, Alan drove to Pine Valley Care Center. His father was sitting in the common room, a checkers game abandoned before him, his attention fixed on the evening news. "Dad," Alan called softly, pulling up a chair beside him. "How are you feeling today?" William turned, recognition warming. His eyes. "Alan, twice in 1 week again, getting to be a habit." "Good habit," Alan replied, grateful for another lucid day. "Thought you might like an update on that job I told you about." He described the day's survey work, the mapping of emergency response routes, the possibilities for improving access to healthcare throughout the county. William listened attentively, occasionally asking surprisingly perceptive questions about the technical aspects. "Your grandfather would have appreciated this," William said when Alan finished. "Remember how he used to complain about the county neglecting the back roads, said someday it would cost lives?" Alan nodded, recalling his grandfather's frequent battles with county commissioners over road maintenance priorities. He was right. It has cost lives. Maybe this project can change that. William studied his son's face. "You're finding your place there. I can hear it in your voice." "Starting to," Alan acknowledged. "It's challenging, but in a good way. Makes me use parts of my brain that have been dormant for a while." "Your mother always said you had more potential than you realized," William said, a fleeting sadness crossing his features at the mention of his late wife. "Seems she was right about that too." Before Alan could respond, a nurse approached with medication for William. "Almost time for the evening activities, Mr. Foster," she reminded him gently. William took the pills obediently, then turned back to Alan. "Brian applied for that internship?" "Yes, he's already interviewed, waiting to hear back." "He'll get it," William said with certainty. "Foster men have good hands and better minds. Don't you forget that." As Alan drove home through the gathering dusk, his father's words echoed in his thoughts. Foster men have good hands and better minds. The simple affirmation carried decades of family history, generations of practical problem solvers who had faced challenges with resourcefulness and determination. The modest lights of Woodhaven appeared ahead, familiar and comforting. Yet, for the first time, Alan found himself contemplating Brian's question about eventually relocating closer to Bayside. Not abandoning Woodhaven, but perhaps expanding their horizons as the opportunities with Blackwell developed. His phone rang through, the car's speaker system. "Dad?" Rebecca's voice carried a note of excitement he hadn't heard in months. "You need to get home. There's something you have to see." "Everything okay, Becca?" Alan asked, immediately concerned. "Better than okay. Just hurry." 20 minutes later, Alan pulled into his driveway to find Brian standing on the porch, practically bouncing with barely contained energy. "Finally! Get in here, Dad!" Inside, Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table, a large envelope before her. "It came today," she announced, pushing it toward him. "From Westlake Academy." Alan picked up the envelope with confusion. Westlake Academy was an elite private school in Bayside, known for its rigorous academics and stellar college placement record. "What's this about?" "Just open it," Rebecca urged, eyes bright with anticipation. The letter inside was printed on heavy cardstock with the school's emblem at the top. "Dear Ms. Foster," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Blackwell Foundation Merit Scholarship for the upcoming academic year. This full tuition scholarship is awarded to students demonstrating exceptional academic promise and community engagement." Alan looked up from the letter, stunned. "Rebecca, did you apply for this?" She shook her head. "Dr. Morgan suggested it when I shadowed her at the hospital. She said they were looking for students with strong science backgrounds from underserved communities. I didn't think anything would come of it, but she helped me put together the application." Her expression turned uncertain. "Are you mad?" "I know it would mean changing schools, and it's in Bayside, so the commute would be..." "Mad," Alan interrupted, setting down the letter to pull his daughter into a hug. "How could I possibly be mad about this? It's an incredible opportunity." He released her to see tears of relief in her eyes. "But Westlake Academy, that's one of the top schools in the state. The tuition must be astronomical." "Full scholarship," Brian reminded him, pointing to the letter. "The Blackwell Foundation, Thomas Blackwell's charitable organization." Alan frowned slightly. "You don't think this is because of my work with them? Some kind of special favor?" Rebecca shook her head firmly. "I had to submit all my transcripts, write essays, do an interview with the academic committee. Dr. Morgan said they had over 200 applicants for 3 scholarships. It wasn't handed to me, Dad." The conviction in her voice eased Alan's concern. "I never doubted your abilities, Becca. You've always been the smartest person in our family." "And," Brian added with a grin, "I got the internship. The offer came by email an hour ago. 20 hours a week in the prototype development lab, starting next month." Alan stood in his kitchen, surrounded by his children's beaming faces, momentarily overwhelmed by how rapidly their lives were transforming. In just 1 month since that stormy night, new paths had opened before them all. Opportunities none of them could have imagined in their former circumstances. "I think this calls for a celebration," he declared, reaching for his keys. "Miller's Diner, my treat." As they walked into the local restaurant 15 minutes later, Alan was surprised to find several tables pushed together in the center, occupied by familiar faces: Sheriff Patterson, Charlie from Dispatch, neighbors from the surprise gathering, and in the middle, Frank Calloway himself. "There he is," Charlie called, raising a glass. "Man of the hour." Alan stopped short, confused. "What's going on here?" Frank stood, uncharacteristically solemn. "News travels fast in small towns, Foster. Word is Blackwell Medical is planning a significant project in Woodhaven County, focusing on rural emergency response. Bringing jobs, resources, maybe even rebuilding parts of the community hospital." Alan glanced at his children, who looked as surprised as he felt. "Where did you hear that?" Administrator Barnes called a special town council meeting this afternoon, Sheriff Patterson explained. Said representatives from Blackwell Medical toured the hospital today, talking about partnership possibilities. Your name came up as the local liaison for the project. That's premature, Alan said carefully. The initiative is still in planning stages. I was just helping the survey team identify problem areas. Maybe, Frank conceded, but Helen Barnes said it's the first positive development for this community's healthcare in a decade. And apparently, it all started because you drove a doctor through a storm. He raised his glass to Alan Foster. Turns out breaking the rules was the right call after all. As glasses lifted around the room, Alan felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in the recognition, hope for what the project might mean for Woodhaven, and a growing sense that his two worlds might be converging rather than pulling him apart. Rebecca squeezed his arm. Dad, this is amazing. You're not just changing our family's future, you might be helping change the whole town's. The realization settled over Alan as he accepted congratulations and questions from neighbors and friends. What had begun as a simple choice to help a stranded doctor had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined, creating ripples that might eventually transform not just his own circumstances, but those of the community he'd served quietly for decades. As the impromptu celebration continued around him, Alan found himself thinking of his father's words again. Foster men have good hands and better minds. Perhaps it was time to discover just how far those hands and minds could reach when given the right opportunity. 2 months into his trial period at Blackwell Medical, Alan found himself standing before a conference room filled with project stakeholders, presenting findings from the rural access surveys. The nervous man who had first walked through Blackwell's doors was gone, replaced by someone who spoke with quiet authority about the real-world challenges facing emergency medical response in rural communities. The data confirms what we suspected, Alan explained, gesturing to the map displayed on the screen behind him. 43% of Woodhaven County residents live more than 30 minutes from emergency medical care during optimal conditions. That percentage jumps to 68 during adverse weather. The audience, a mix of Blackwell executives, medical professionals, and potential investors, listened with focused attention as Alan highlighted critical access points and proposed solutions developed by the team over the past weeks. Traditional ambulances can't navigate these terrain challenges, he continued, advancing to images he'd taken of particularly problematic roadways. But the modified vehicle prototypes our engineering team has developed show promising results. In initial testing, Dr. Harrison took over for the technical portion of the presentation, but Alan noticed Thomas Blackwell watching him with undisguised approval from the back of the room. The past 2 months had transformed Alan's relationship with the company founder from awkward deference to mutual respect, strengthened by regular visits with Zachary, who had made a remarkable recovery. After the presentation concluded, and the room began to clear, Blackwell approached. Excellent work, Alan. You've come a long way from that first day when you looked ready to bolt for the door. Alan smiled, acknowledging the truth in the observation. Still can't quite believe I'm giving presentations to rooms full of executives instead of changing flat tires. You're doing considerably more than giving presentations, Blackwell corrected. The project has advanced more in 2 months with your input than in the 6 months prior. The field testing schedule has been moved up based on your route assessments. Before Alan could respond, his phone vibrated with a text message. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. Sorry, it's the care facility where my father stays. Need to take this. Stepping into the hallway, Alan called Pine Valley immediately. The nurse on duty explained that William had experienced increased confusion and agitation that morning, repeatedly trying to leave the facility, insisting he needed to check on the trucks. It happens with his condition, the nurse assured. "Alan, but we wanted you to be aware. He's calmer now, though he's been asking for you." Alan assured her he would visit that afternoon, then returned to find Blackwell waiting patiently. "Everything all right?" "My father," Alan explained, "having a difficult day with his Alzheimer's. I should probably head to Pine Valley after we wrap up here." Blackwell nodded, understanding. "Of course, family comes first." He hesitated, then added, "I've been meaning to ask, are you satisfied with his care arrangement? Pine Valley has a good reputation, but Bayside has some specialized memory care facilities with innovative programs." The suggestion caught Alan off guard. "I'm sure they're excellent, but Pine Valley is what we can manage financially, even with the new position." Despite the generous compensation from Blackwell, years of financial strain had left little cushion, and William's long-term care insurance covered only basic services. "I understand," Blackwell said simply, not pressing the issue. "The offer remains open if circumstances change. Now, shall we join the others for lunch? I believe they're discussing the community presentation scheduled for next week in Woodhaven." The drive to Pine Valley that afternoon gave Alan time to reflect on the morning's presentation and Blackwell's subtle offer regarding his father's care. The past 2 months had brought so many changes. Brian thriving in his internship, already making meaningful contributions to the vehicle prototype team. Rebecca finishing her current school year with honors while preparing to transfer to Westlake Academy in the fall. And Alan himself finding unexpected fulfillment in work that challenged him intellectually while still valuing his practical experience. Yet his father's condition remained a constant concern. A reminder that not all of life's challenges had neat, technological solutions. William's lucid days had grown less frequent and the moments of clarity more fleeting. At Pine Valley, Alan found his father sitting in the common room, staring out the window with the distant expression that had become increasingly common. When Alan touched his shoulder, William looked up without immediate recognition. "Dad, it's Alan. Heard you were having a rough morning." Slowly, focus returned to William's eyes. "Alan, the trucks need checking before the storm." Alan settled into the chair beside him. "The trucks are fine, Dad. Everything's taken care of." William frowned, struggling against the fog of his condition. "No, this is important. The Foster name, reputation for reliability." It was a phrase he had repeated countless times during Alan's childhood, the cornerstone of their family business philosophy. "I remember, Dad, Foster's Towing, always there when needed." William nodded, some tension easing from his frame. "You working today? Looks like you're dressed for office work, not towing." Alan considered how to explain his new position. On previous visits, when his father was confused, attempting to outline the Blackwell situation had only created more agitation. "I'm still helping people when they're stranded," he said carefully, "just in a different way now." This seemed to satisfy William, who nodded sagely. "Service is service. Doesn't matter if it's a tow truck or a fancy office. People need help. Fosters provide it." The simple articulation of values struck Alan forcefully. Service is service. His father had distilled the connection between Alan's past work and present role to its essence, cutting through titles and trappings to the core purpose. They spent the afternoon together, William drifting between confusion and moments of surprising clarity. During one such lucid interval, Alan showed him photos of Brian at the Blackwell Engineering Lab, proudly demonstrating a suspension system he'd helped design for the emergency response vehicles. "Good hands," William observed, pride evident in his voice. "Gets that from both sides of the family. Your mother could fix anything with moving parts." The mention of Alan's mother brought a familiar ache. "He reminds me of her sometimes, the way he focuses when solving a problem." William nodded, his gaze distant with memory. "Rebecca's like you, Practical but idealistic, wants to fix the big problems, not just the immediate ones. The insight surprised Alan. He'd always thought Rebecca took after Marie with her academic drive and determined nature. "You think I'm idealistic?" William's laugh held a hint of his old self. "Why else would you have kept Foster's Towing running at a loss those years after your mother's healthcare bills? Why drive a doctor through a hurricane to save a child you'd never met?" He patted Alan's hand. "Practical enough to know how to help, idealistic enough to believe you should. That's the Foster way." As evening approached, William grew tired, his moments of clarity receding. Alan helped him back to his room, promised to visit again soon, and left with his father's words echoing in his thoughts. The commute home took him past the Woodhaven Community Hospital, where temporary signs announced the upcoming presentation of the Rural Medical Access Initiative. Alan pulled into the parking lot on impulse, curious about the preparations. Inside, he found Administrator Barnes directing the setup of displays in the hospital's small conference center. She brightened at the sight of him. "Alan? Just the person I wanted to see. The materials from Blackwell arrived this morning, but I'm not sure about the optimal arrangement." For the next hour, Alan helped organize the presentation space, positioning information displays about emergency response vehicles, portable medical equipment, and communication systems in a logical flow that would make sense to community members. As they worked, Helen shared the buzz already building in the community. "The town council can't stop talking about the potential impact," she confided. "Not just the medical access improvements, but the possibility of Woodhaven becoming a regional hub for the initiative. That could mean jobs, infrastructure investments, maybe even expansions to our facility here." Alan nodded, understanding the hope in her voice. Rural hospitals across the country were struggling to remain open, many forced to cut services or close entirely. The initiative is designed to strengthen existing facilities, not replace them, he confirmed. Blackwell sees local hospitals as essential partners. "And to think it all started because you drove through a storm," Helen marveled. "Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest decisions." Later that evening, as Alan pulled into his driveway, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked at the curb. Inside his house, he found Rebecca and Brian hosting Dr. Morgan, who sat at their kitchen table surrounded by college brochures and financial aid forms. "Dr. Morgan came to help me with scholarship applications," Rebecca explained as Alan entered, "for when I graduate from Westlake next year." "Call me Melissa, please," the neurosurgeon insisted, standing to greet Alan. "Hope you don't mind the ambush. Rebecca mentioned you might be visiting your father today, and I had some free time to go over these application strategies." "Not at all," Alan assured her, touched by her interest in his daughter's future. "Though I'm surprised a neurosurgeon has free time for college counseling. Brain surgery is actually less complicated than college financial aid forms," she replied with a laugh. "Besides, Rebecca has real potential for medicine if she's interested. The path from Woodhaven to medical school isn't well marked, but it exists. I should know, I took a similar journey from a small town in Colorado." As the evening progressed, Alan observed the easy rapport between Dr. Morgan and his children. She spoke to them as intellectual equals, challenging their assumptions while encouraging their ambitions. When Rebecca hesitantly mentioned her interest in neurology, Dr. Morgan outlined practical steps, summer programs, undergraduate research opportunities, mentorship connections that could make the seemingly impossible goal achievable. After Rebecca and Brian had gone to bed, Dr. Morgan lingered, accepting Alan's offer of coffee. "You've raised remarkable children," she said simply, "especially given the circumstances." "Their mother deserves most of the credit," Alan replied, the familiar reflex of redirecting praise kicking in, perhaps, Dr. Morgan acknowledged. But they've had you as their example for the past 10 years, watching you work multiple jobs, maintain your integrity when it would have been easier not to, put their needs above your own. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. That shapes young, in people profoundly. Alan found himself unexpectedly moved by her perception. I just did what any parent would do. Again, with the anyone would have done it. She teased gently, echoing his response from the night of the storm. You really believe that, don't you? Before he could answer, she continued, her tone becoming more serious. My father told me about your visit with William today. I hope you don't mind that he shared that. Alan shook his head. It's fine. Your father has been very understanding about my family responsibilities. He mentioned the suggestion about memory in care options in Bayside, she continued carefully, and that you had reservations, partly financial. Pine Valley provides adequate care, Alan said defensively. They've been good to my father. I'm sure they have, Dr. Morgan agreed. But as a physician, I'm familiar with the specialized programs available at Riverside Memory Center in Bayside. They're using innovative therapy approaches that show promising results for slowing progression in some Alzheimer's patients. She hesitated, then added, the Blackwell Foundation maintains several patient sponsorships there, not as charity, but as part of our ongoing research into treatment outcomes. Alan understood what she was suggesting. Dr. Morgan, Melissa, your family has already done so much for mine. The position, the scholarship for Rebecca, Brian's internship. I can't accept more without feeling like you're taking advantage, she finished for him. Alan, the Rural Medical Access Initiative exists because of your actions that night. The progress we've made in 2 months with your input has advanced the project beyond our most optimistic projections. My father doesn't make business decisions. Based on sentiment, he sees value in what you bring to Blackwell. The same is true of Brian's contributions to the engineering team and Rebecca's potential in medicine. She leaned forward slightly. As for William, consider that having access to him as a participant in our memory care research program would be valuable to our work. The patient sponsorships aren't charity. They're investment in medical advancement. The reframing gave Alan a pause. He'd been viewing the various opportunities as personal favors rather than mutual exchanges of value. I'll think about it, he promised. Talk to William's doctors about whether a transfer might benefit him. Dr. Morgan nodded, satisfied. That's all I ask. She glanced at her watch. I should go. Early surgery tomorrow. As she gathered her things, she added almost casually, by the way, the 3-month trial period ends next week. Have you given any thought to what comes next? The question caught Alan by surprise. He'd been so immersed in the work that he'd nearly forgotten the temporary nature of his arrangement. Actually, no. Things have been moving so quickly. My father will want to discuss making the position permanent, she informed him, with expanded responsibilities and compensation to match. You've proven yourself invaluable to the initiative. After she left, Alan sat alone at the kitchen table, contemplating the crossroads before him. The 3-month mark didn't just represent a decision about employment. It signaled a potential permanent shift in their family's trajectory. His thoughts were interrupted by Brian, who reappeared in pajama pants and a Blackwell medical t-shirt from the intern orientation. Was that about Grandpa? He asked, helping himself to water from the refrigerator. I overheard something about memory care. Alan nodded, seeing no reason to shield his adult son from the reality of their situation. Dr. Morgan suggested a specialized facility in Bayside might offer better care for his condition. The Blackwell Foundation sponsors research patients there. Brian considered this thoughtfully. That could be good for him, and it would be easier to visit if we were living closer to Bayside. The casual mention of relocation confirmed what Alan had suspected. His children had already mentally moved beyond Woodhaven, seeing their futures aligned with the opportunities in Bayside. "You've been thinking about us moving?" Alan asked. Brian shrugged, but his expression was serious. "It makes sense, Dad. The commute is wearing you down. Rebecca's starting at Westlake in the fall. My internship's been extended through next year." He hesitated, then added, "And we could be closer to Grandpa if he transfers to the Bayside facility." The practical assessment, so like Alan's own thought processes, brought a smile to his face. "When did you start being the practical one in this family?" "Learned from the best," Brian replied with a small grin. "So, are you going to accept when Mr. Blackwell offers you the permanent position?" Alan considered the question that had been forming in his mind throughout the evening. "I think I am. It feels right, like I'm doing work that matters, that uses everything I know in a new way." Brian nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I've been thinking about my transfer to the engineering program. If I stay with the internship at Blackwell, I could apply directly to Bayside University instead of State. Their biomedical engineering program partners with Blackwell on a lot of projects." The revelation showed how deeply Brian had already integrated himself into the possibilities opened by their connection to Blackwell. "You've got it all figured out, huh?" "Not everything," Brian admitted, "but more than 2 months ago when we were just trying to keep the lights on." He studied his father's face. "Are you happy, Dad, with all these changes?" The simple question deserved honest reflection. Alan thought about the past 2 months, the intellectual challenge of the work, the satisfaction of seeing his children thrive, the sense of contributing to something larger than himself. "Yes," he realized, "I am. It's not what I expected for my life, but it feels like where I'm supposed to be." Brian nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Mom would be proud, you know, of all of us." The mention of Marie brought no sharp pain this time, just a gentle ache softened by the passage of years. "She would," Alan agreed. "Especially of you and Rebecca. Of you too, Dad," Brian insisted, "for being brave enough to change direction when the opportunity came." After Brian returned to bed, Alan stepped onto the front porch, gazing at the familiar street where he'd lived his entire adult life. Woodhaven slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, the same view he'd contemplated thousands of times before. Yet now he saw it differently, not just as home, but as a community he might help transform through his work with Blackwell. The thought of leaving brought a pang of nostalgia, but not the fear he might have expected. Service is service, his father had said. The Foster Way remained the same, whether enacted through a tow truck on these familiar streets or through a medical initiative that could benefit rural communities everywhere. Next week, the Rural Medical Access Initiative would be formally presented to the Woodhaven community. The week after, Alan would need to give Thomas Blackwell his decision about the permanent position. And somewhere in the mix, he would need to investigate the memory care facility for his father, discuss the possibility of relocating with Rebecca, and determine what a permanent move to Bayside might mean for their family. The challenges ahead were significant, but Alan faced them with a new confidence. The storms of the past had prepared him for this moment of transformation, teaching him that the most important journeys often began with a simple choice to help someone in need, regardless of the cost or consequences. From his porch, Alan could just make out the distant lights of the community hospital where everything would be announced next week. The circle was completing itself, from crisis to opportunity, from individual choice to community transformation. Whatever came next, he was ready for the journey. The Woodhaven Community Hospital conference room had never seen a crowd like this. Every chair was filled, with people standing against the walls and spilling into the hallway. Town council members, medical staff, first responders, and ordinary citizens had gathered to learn about the Rural Medical Access Initiative that had been generating buzz throughout the county for weeks. Alan stood to the side of the small stage where Thomas Blackwell was completing his overview of the project. The presentation had been underway for 30 minutes, with Blackwell outlining the initiative's vision, while Dr. Harrison explained the technical aspects of the proposed medical transport vehicles and portable diagnostic equipment. "And now," Blackwell said, "I'd like to introduce someone many of you already know, Alan Foster, our transportation logistics consultant and the person whose actions during the spring storm catalyzed this entire project. Alan will explain how the initiative will specifically address Woodhaven County's unique challenges." The warm applause as Alan approached the podium contained a note of pride from his neighbors and friends. Standing before them in this new role felt surreal, so different from the countless times he'd towed their vehicles or helped them out of ditches over the decades. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," Alan began, his voice steady despite his lingering discomfort with public speaking. "As most of you know, I've spent my life on the roads of Woodhaven County. What you might not know is how those roads can become barriers to emergency medical care." He advanced through his presentation slides, showing maps of the county with emergency response times, color-coded by season and weather conditions. These aren't just abstract statistics. They represent our neighbors, our families, people waiting for help during their most vulnerable moments. From the audience, Alan could see Sheriff Patterson nodding in recognition, along with several EMTs who had lived these challenges firsthand. The statistics validated what they already knew from experience. Rural emergency response faced unique obstacles that urban systems rarely encountered. The Rural Medical Access Initiative proposes 3 key solutions for Woodhaven, Alan continued, warming to his subject. First, specialized emergency vehicles designed specifically for our terrain challenges. He clicked to show renderings of the modified ambulances with advanced suspension systems and all-terrain capabilities. Second, portable diagnostic and treatment equipment that can be deployed by first responders before transportation begins. Another slide revealed compact medical devices designed for field use. And third, enhanced communications infrastructure to eliminate the dead zones that currently exist throughout the county. As Alan outlined implementation timelines and potential partnerships with local emergency services, he caught sight of Frank Calloway near the back, arms crossed but listening intently. His former boss, still his boss for 2 days each week, had maintained a cautious neutrality about Alan's involvement with Blackwell, neither overtly supportive nor actively resistant. But this initiative isn't just about equipment and technology, Alan emphasized, coming to the heart of his message. It's about recognizing that every life deserves the same access to emergency care, regardless of geography or road conditions. It's about ensuring that a child having a seizure on Big Ridge Farm has the same chance of timely treatment as someone living next door to this hospital. The personal framing resonated with the audience. Alan saw heads nodding, expressions engaged. These weren't abstract concepts to them, but lived realities. The anxious waits for ambulances during snowstorms, the knowledge that serious medical emergencies often meant transport to Bayside, with precious time lost on winding rural roads. Woodhaven has been selected as the pilot community for this initiative, Alan concluded. What we develop and implement here will become a model for rural communities across the country. Your input, your experience, your knowledge of local challenges will be essential to making this project successful. The applause that followed felt genuinely enthusiastic rather than merely polite. As Blackwell returned to the podium to open the floor for questions, Alan stepped back, relieved to have completed his portion without stumbling. The Q&A session revealed the community's deep interest in the initiative. Questions ranged from technical inquiries about the vehicle's capabilities in specific conditions to practical concerns about training for local first responders. Sheriff Patterson asked about coordination between emergency services and the new resources, while Administrator Barnes questioned how the hospital's existing protocols would integrate with the initiative systems. Throughout the discussion, Alan noticed Thomas Blackwell consistently deferring technical questions to his team, while addressing broader strategic inquiries himself. The approach demonstrated both his command of the initiative's vision and his respect for his team's expertise, a leadership style Alan had come to admire over the past months. When Frank Calloway finally raised his hand, a sudden tension rippled through the room. Those familiar with the history between Alan and his employer anticipated potential conflict. "Mr. Calloway," Blackwell acknowledged, seemingly unaware of any undercurrent. "Foster's Towing has been providing emergency roadside assistance in this county for over 50 years, Frank began, his tone measured. "We've pulled plenty of ambulances out of ditches and helped clear paths during weather emergencies. I'm wondering where local service providers like us fit into this fancy initiative." The question carried an edge, but also a legitimate concern about being overlooked or replaced. Alan held his breath, uncertain how Blackwell would respond to the barely veiled challenge. Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. "An excellent question, and one that goes to the heart of our approach. This initiative isn't about replacing existing local expertise. It's about enhancing and supporting it." He glanced at Alan before continuing. "In fact, we hope to establish formal partnerships with local service providers like Foster's Towing, creating a coordinated response network that leverages your knowledge of the area and experience with emergency situations." The answer seemed to satisfy Frank, who nodded curtly before sitting down. As the session continued, Alan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The potential conflict between his past and present professional worlds appeared to be resolving itself through Blackwell's inclusive vision. After the formal presentation concluded, the audience was invited to examine the prototype displays and speak directly with team members. Alan found himself surrounded by neighbors and acquaintances, their questions now more personal than technical. "So you're really working for Blackwell now?" Mrs. Henderson asked. The elderly woman whose car Alan had jump-started countless times over the years. "Not just helping with this presentation. I am," Alan confirmed. "Still at Foster's 2 days a week, but yes, primarily with Blackwell now." She patted his arm with grandmotherly affection. "Good for you, dear. Though I do hope someone else knows how to coax my old Buick back to life when it acts up." The comment brought a smile to Alan's face. These connections, the simple human interactions that had defined his years of service to Woodhaven, remained important to him despite his new role. Across the room, he spotted Rebecca and Brian mingling with the Blackwell team, his children navigating this professional setting with remarkable ease. Rebecca stood beside Dr. Morgan, helping explain the portable diagnostic equipment to a group of high school students, while Brian discussed suspension modifications with Sheriff Patterson and several EMTs. "They've taken to this naturally, Thomas," Blackwell observed, appearing beside Alan. "Your children have integrated with our team as if they've always belonged there." "They're adaptable," Alan replied with quiet pride. "Getting opportunities I never imagined for them." Blackwell studied the scene thoughtfully. "When I founded Blackwell Medical 35 years ago, I hoped to create technologies that saved lives. What I've learned over time is that technologies alone aren't enough. You need the right people implementing them, people who understand both the science and the human elements." He turned to Alan. That's what your family brings to this initiative, that blend of technical aptitude and human connection. Before Alan could respond, Frank Calloway approached, his expression unreadable. Nice presentation, Foster. Sounds like you found your calling with the corporate types. Alan tensed slightly, uncertain whether the comment contained criticism. Frank, glad you could make it. An awkward silence stretched between them until Frank sighed, his gruff demeanor softening fractionally. Look, I've been thinking about our arrangement. With this initiative moving forward and your involvement deepening, it doesn't make sense for you to keep splitting your time. You should be focusing on this full-time. The statement, delivered with Frank's characteristic bluntness, caught Alan off guard. Are you firing me? Frank actually chuckled. No, you idiot. I'm releasing you from your obligation. Consider your position at Foster's Towing officially ended with my blessing. He extended his hand. No hard feelings. This is where you need to be now. The gesture represented more than a professional transition. It was Frank's acknowledgement that Alan had found his rightful place. Alan accepted the handshake with genuine appreciation. Thank you, Frank. That means a lot. Just make sure these fancy new emergency vehicles don't need towing too often, Frank added, with a hint of his usual gruffness. We still charge triple after midnight. As Frank moved away, Blackwell turned to Alan with raised eyebrows. A significant moment, I gather? You could say that, Alan agreed. Frank just removed the last complication from my decision about your permanent position offer. Blackwell smiled. Excellent timing. I was planning to discuss that with you tomorrow. He paused, surveying the active community engagement throughout the room. Based on the reception today, I think we can move forward with establishing the Woodhaven pilot program immediately, which means we'll need you on board full-time without delay. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Alan watched as his worlds merged before his eyes. Rebecca discussing career paths with her former science teacher and Dr. Morgan. Brian showing Sheriff Patterson the emergency vehicle designs he'd contributed to. Administrator Barnes and Thomas Blackwell deep in conversation about expanding the hospital's emergency capabilities. By the time the event concluded, Alan felt a profound sense of alignment, as if disparate pieces of his life were finally fitting together in a coherent pattern. The initiative that had begun with his drive through a storm was taking shape as something that could transform his community while providing new directions for his family. Outside in the parking lot, as the last attendees dispersed into the evening, Alan found himself standing with Rebecca and Brian beside Thomas and Melissa Blackwell. Quite a successful presentation, Thomas observed. The community response exceeds our expectations. People here understand what's at stake, Alan replied. They've all experienced the challenges of rural emergency care in some way. Rebecca, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Mr. Blackwell, I have a question that's not about the medical technology exactly. Thomas turned to her with interest. Go ahead, Rebecca. When you implement this initiative in Woodhaven, will you need a local office, a physical headquarters for the teams working here? The question seemed to amuse Thomas. As a matter of fact, we've been evaluating potential locations. The initiative will require space for vehicle maintenance, equipment storage, training facilities, and administrative functions. Why do you ask? Rebecca exchanged glances with Brian before continuing. The old Wilson property on the edge of town has been vacant for years, the one with the large warehouse and office building. It's perfectly situated at the junction of the main county roads, has good access for larger vehicles and plenty of space for expansion. Alan stared at his daughter in surprise. He knew the property she mentioned, a once thriving distribution center that had closed when the regional economy shifted, leaving a well-built but abandoned facility that had become something of an eyesore on the edge of Woodhaven. Thomas looked intrigued. I'm not familiar with this property. Is it currently on the market? Not officially, Brian chimed in, but Mrs. Wilson has been trying to sell it since her husband passed away 3 years ago. No buyers because it's too large for most local businesses, but too far from major highways for distribution companies. Dr. Morgan smiled at the siblings' initiative. And how exactly do you know all this? Research, Rebecca replied simply. After the dinner at your home, when we realized the initiative might establish a presence here, we started looking into possible locations. The Wilson property seemed ideal. Alan couldn't help but smile at his children's foresight. While he had been focused on his new role and the technical aspects of the initiative, they had been thinking ahead to its practical implementation in Woodhaven. Thomas turned to his daughter with raised eyebrows. It seems we should have the real estate team look into this property immediately. Establishing a local headquarters would certainly strengthen our presence in the community and demonstrate our long-term commitment. I could arrange a tour, Alan offered. I know Margaret Wilson quite well. Helped her with car troubles many times over the years. As they finalized plans to visit the property the following week, Alan felt a surge of unexpected emotion. The initiative was no longer just a concept or a presentation. It was becoming a physical reality that would take root in Woodhaven, potentially transforming the community while creating new opportunities for its residents. Later that night, as Alan drove his children home, Rebecca broke the comfortable silence. So, Dad, now that Frank has officially released you and Mr. Blackwell wants you full-time, have you decided about the moving conversation? Brian turned in the passenger seat to hear Alan's response, both children clearly having discussed this topic between themselves. Alan took a deep breath. The question of relocating closer to Bayside had been hovering at the edges of their family discussions for weeks. With Rebecca starting at Westlake Academy in the fall, Brian's internship becoming more integral to his education, and now the possibility of transferring William to the specialized memory care facility, practical arguments for moving had been accumulating. I've been thinking about it, Alan admitted. Even more after today. If Blackwell establishes a headquarters here, I'd likely split my time between Woodhaven and Bayside. Living somewhere in between might make sense. The Lakeview area is nice, Brian suggested a bit too casually. About halfway between. Good schools for Rebecca's final year, reasonable commute to both locations. Alan shot his son a knowing look. You've been researching this too, I see. Just exploring options, Brian replied with a grin that reminded Alan powerfully of Marie. Being practical, like you taught us? We don't have to decide tonight, Alan said, though he sensed his children had already made up their minds. But yes, I think moving is the right choice, especially if your grandfather transfers to Riverside Memory Center. Being closer to him would ease my mind. Rebecca leaned forward from the back seat. What about this house? All our memories are here. The question touched on Alan's deepest reservation about moving, leaving the home he had shared with Marie, where they had raised their children, where every corner held echoes of their life together. The memories come with us, he said finally, the truth of it settling in his heart as he spoke. This house has served us well, but it's the people who matter, not the place. As they pulled into their driveway, Alan noticed a large manila envelope. Leaning against the front door, Rebecca retrieved it, checking the label. It's for you, Dad, from Blackwell Medical. Inside the house, Alan opened the envelope to find formal employment documents, the permanent position offer Thomas had mentioned, with details of responsibilities, compensation, and benefits. Attached was a handwritten note from Thomas. Alan, Today's presentation confirmed what we've known for months. You are essential to this initiative's success. The enclosed terms reflect our valuation of your contributions and our commitment to your family's well-being. Additionally, I've included information about Riverside Memory Center and the Blackwell Foundation's patient sponsorship program. William's application has been pre-approved should you decide this option is appropriate for his care. No obligation, simply another resource available to you. Looking forward to our next chapter of work together. Thomas. Alan passed the papers to his curious children, watching as they scanned the terms with widening eyes. "Dad, this is..." Brian began, looking up in shock. "The salary is more than triple what you made at Foster's, plus health benefits, retirement plan, education allowances, and look at this," Rebecca pointed to a clause midway down the page. "Flexible work location, with offices provided in both Bayside headquarters and the forthcoming Woodhaven facility." Alan nodded, taking in their reactions. The offer represented security and opportunity beyond anything he had imagined possible just months ago. Yet, the most meaningful aspect wasn't the compensation, but the structure that would allow him to continue, serving his community while expanding his impact through the initiative. "So," Brian prompted, "are you accepting?" Alan smiled at his children's eager expressions. "Yes, I think I am." Rebecca launched herself into a hug that nearly knocked Alan backward, while Brian watched with uncharacteristic emotion evident in his eyes. "Mum would be so proud," Rebecca whispered against Alan's shoulder. The comment brought no pain this time, only warm certainty. Marie would indeed have been proud, not of the position or the salary, but of their family's resilience, their ability to find new paths forward while honoring the values that had always defined them. Later, after his children had gone to bed, Alan sat on the porch steps with Jackson beside him, contemplating the stars above Woodhaven as he had countless times before. The same sky would shine over them wherever they moved, he realized. The constants in his life weren't dependent on geography. In just 3 months, a single decision made during a storm had cascaded into transformations he could never have anticipated. New purpose in his work, expanded horizons for his children, improved care possibilities for his father, and potentially enhanced emergency services for his entire community. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, signing the employment contract, beginning the process of exploring William's transfer to Riverside, investigating housing options, evaluating the Wilson property for the initiative's headquarters. The path ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges alongside opportunities, yet as Alan sat in the quiet of the spring night, he felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the disparate threads of his life were weaving themselves into a coherent whole, guided by the simple principle his father had articulated: service is service. The Foster Way remained consistent, even as its expression evolved to meet new circumstances. Jackson nudged his hand, the old retriever sensing his contemplative mood. Alan scratched behind the dog's ears, smiling at his faithful companion. "Big change is coming, boy," he murmured, echoing words he'd spoken months earlier, with uncertainty now replaced by conviction. "But this time, I think we're ready for them." 6 months after the community presentation, Alan stood in the former Wilson warehouse, now transformed into the Woodhaven Operations Center for the Rural Medical Access Initiative. The cavernous space hummed with activity as technicians prepared specialized emergency vehicles for deployment. Medical staff trained on portable equipment, and administrative personnel coordinated with regional emergency services. Hard to believe. "This was an empty building half a year ago," Dr. Harrison commented, joining Alan by the observation window overlooking the main floor. "Your children had remarkable foresight identifying this location." Alan nodded, watching as Brian led a team of engineers through final checks on a vehicle's modified suspension system. At 21, his son had transitioned from intern to paid engineering assistant, his academic schedule now fully integrated with his work at Blackwell. They saw possibilities I didn't, Alan acknowledged. Through the opposite doorway, a group of first responders entered for their training session, led by Sheriff Patterson and Administrator Barnes. The initiative had forged formal partnerships with all emergency services in the county, creating a coordinated response system that leveraged both Blackwell's technology and local expertise. The deployment timeline still on track? Alan asked, reviewing the schedule on his tablet. Ahead of schedule, actually, Dr. Harrison confirmed. The first 4 vehicles go into service next week. The communications infrastructure upgrades are complete for the southern portion of the county. We're already seeing response time improvements in simulation models. The progress was remarkable by any standard, accelerated by the community's enthusiastic embrace of the initiative. Local contractors had prioritized the facility renovation. Emergency services had committed personnel to specialized training, and residents had volunteered for system testing across the county's diverse terrain. Thomas wants a full briefing before the launch ceremony, Dr. Harrison continued. He's arriving tomorrow morning with the board members. Everything prepared on your end? Just finalizing the presentation now, Alan assured him. Rebecca's been helping with the data visualization. She has a gift for translating complex information into understandable formats. His daughter had become an unofficial team member during her school breaks, her interest in medicine expanding to include healthcare, systems and accessibility issues. Her first semester at Westlake Academy had exceeded all expectations, with teachers already discussing college recommendations for pre-med programs. As Dr. Harrison departed for his next meeting, Alan remained at the window, reflecting on the whirlwind of changes the past months had brought. The Foster family now lived in a comfortable house in Lakeview, positioned between Woodhaven and Bayside, as Brian had suggested. William had transferred to Riverside Memory Center, where specialized therapies and activities had produced noticeable improvements in his cognitive engagement, if not his underlying condition. Most significantly, Alan had found unexpected fulfillment in work that bridged his practical experience with broader healthcare challenges. His role had evolved beyond logistics consulting to overall operational management for the Woodhaven implementation, drawing on decades of problem-solving skills in entirely new contexts. Mr. Foster? A young dispatcher approached, her expression concerned. There's a situation developing in the North County. Flash flooding has isolated the Jensen farm. Mrs. Jensen is in labor and standard ambulance access is cut off. Alan immediately shifted to operational mode, moving toward the communications center with the dispatcher following. Have we deployed any of the test vehicles in that sector? Vehicle 3 is approximately 20 minutes from their location, she confirmed. Sheriff Patterson is coordinating, but he requested your input given the terrain challenges. In the communications hub, monitors displayed real-time data from weather services, vehicle tracking, and emergency response coordination. Sheriff Patterson's voice came through the speaker system, background noise indicating he was in a moving vehicle. Foster, you reading me? We've got about 14 inches of water across Mill Creek Road, rising fast. The regular ambulance crew can't get through. Alan studied the topographical display, identifying alternative approaches. The modified Vehicle 3 should handle those conditions. Has Dr. Whitaker been notified? Already en route to intercept, the dispatcher confirmed. Estimated arrival at the vehicle rendezvous point in 12 minutes. The next hour unfolded with coordinated precision as Alan directed the emergency response from the operations center. The specialized vehicle, equipped with enhanced water-fording capabilities and satellite communication systems, successfully reached the isolated farmhouse. Dr. Whitaker stabilized Mrs. Jensen while the vehicle transported them safely through flooded terrain to the designated helicopter evacuation point, where airlift to Bayside Medical Center awaited. By late afternoon, word came through that Jennifer Jensen had delivered a healthy baby girl, mother and child, both doing well despite the dramatic circumstances. Alan shared the news with the operations team, their collective relief palpable. First official rescue with the new system, the young dispatcher noted with satisfaction. And it worked exactly as designed. Alan nodded, recognizing the milestone. This wasn't a simulation or training exercise, but a real-life implementation of the systems they'd spent months developing. A family that might have faced tragic outcomes due to geographic isolation had instead received timely, appropriate care, despite extreme conditions. Document everything, he instructed the team. Response times, decision points, coordination challenges. We'll review the entire incident tomorrow for any potential improvements. Later that evening, as Alan prepared to leave, his phone chimed with a message from Thomas Blackwell. Heard about today's incident. Outstanding work by all involved. This is precisely what the initiative was designed to accomplish. See you tomorrow for the full briefing. TB, the simple acknowledgement, carried significant weight. Today's successful intervention validated not just the initiative's technical systems, but its fundamental purpose, bridging gaps in emergency care access that had long been accepted as inevitable in rural communities. As Alan drove home through the autumn twilight, the familiar landscape of Woodhaven County scrolled past his windows. Though he no longer lived within the town limits, his connection to the community felt stronger than ever, transformed from individual service through his tow truck to systemic impact through the initiative. The house lights were on when he arrived. Home, Rebecca's car in the driveway alongside Brian's motorcycle. Inside, he found both his children in the kitchen with an unexpected guest, Dr. Melissa Morgan, casually dressed and helping Rebecca prepare dinner. Perfect timing, Dr. Morgan greeted him. We were just debating whether to start without you, Melissa. It brought news, Rebecca explained, her expression barely containing excitement, about the hospital internship program. Alan hung his keys on the hook, raising a questioning eyebrow at the neurosurgeon who had become a frequent visitor to their home over the past months, her mentorship of Rebecca evolving into friendship with the entire family. Westlake Academy nominates 2 students annually for the Bayside Medical Center Shadowing Program, Dr. Morgan explained. Reserved for students demonstrating exceptional promise in science and medicine, Rebecca's been selected as one of this year's participants. Pride swelled in Alan's chest as he turned to his daughter. That's incredible, Becca. Congratulations. Rebecca's cheeks flushed with pleasure. It means I'll get to observe in different departments throughout spring semester. Actual clinical experience before college. She's being modest, Dr. Morgan added. The selection committee was particularly impressed with her independent research project on rural medical access disparities, directly inspired by our initiative. As they settled around the dinner table, conversation flowed easily between updates on Rebecca's school achievements, Brian's engineering projects, and preparations for tomorrow's board presentation. Alan observed his children with quiet satisfaction, recognizing how they had blossomed in this new chapter of their lives. Brian's natural technical abilities, finding purpose in practical applications. Rebecca's academic drive, channeled toward meaningful healthcare challenges. I understand you had quite a dramatic implementation of the emergency system today, Dr. Morgan said, turning the conversation to Alan. Jennifer Jensen is a former patient of mine. Her husband called to say, both she and baby Melissa are doing well. Alan paused, fork halfway to his mouth. They named the baby Melissa? Dr. Morgan smiled. Apparently so, after the doctor who sent the special ambulance to help them. She glanced at Rebecca. These are the moments that make all the administrative headaches of medicine worthwhile. After dinner, as Brian and Rebecca cleared dishes, Dr. Morgan followed Alan onto the back deck where the evening air carried the crisp scent of approaching winter. "I visited your father at Riverside yesterday," she mentioned, leaning against the railing. Beside him, he was having a good day, recognized me immediately, asked about that fancy medical project you're working on. The update brought a smile to Alan's face. William's good days had become more frequent since his transfer to the specialized facility, though the overall trajectory of his condition remained unchanged. He still has moments of complete clarity. They're precious. "The caregivers mentioned how regularly you visit," Dr. Morgan observed. "3 times a week, despite your schedule." "He'd do the same for me," Alan replied simply. The drive to Riverside had become a fixed point in his weekly routine, a commitment he maintained regardless of work demands or weather challenges. A comfortable silence settled between them as twilight deepened. In the months since their first chaotic meeting during the storm, Dr. Morgan had become an unexpected constant in the Foster family's reconfigured life. Professional colleague, mentor to Rebecca, frequent dinner guest, and increasingly, a personal friend to Alan. "Tomorrow's presentation will go well," she said finally. "The board already considers the Woodhaven implementation a success story. Today's incident only confirms what the data has been showing. The initiative is creating measurable improvements in emergency medical access. There's still so much to do," Alan noted. "The Northern Sector communications infrastructure, the community hospital equipment upgrades, the first responder training expansions." Dr. Morgan smiled at his characteristic focus on remaining challenges rather than achievements. "True. But it's also important to acknowledge milestones. 6 months ago, none of this existed. A baby girl is alive and healthy tonight because of systems you helped create." The perspective adjustment resonated with Alan. Throughout his career at Foster's Towing, he had always moved quickly from one emergency to the next, rarely pausing to consider cumulative impact. The initiative demanded a different mindset, balancing immediate response with long-term vision, individual interventions with systemic improvements. "My father said something interesting during my last visit," Alan reflected. "He was confused about most current events, but perfectly clear about this. He said, 'You've turned roadside assistance into something bigger, but it's still the same. Work, helping people reach safety when they're stranded.' In his mind, there's a direct line from towing to the initiative." "There is," Dr. Morgan agreed. "That's why you were the right person for this role. You understand that emergency response isn't abstract. It's about real people facing their worst moments, needing someone to bridge the gap between danger and safety." Their conversation was interrupted by Brian opening the deck door. "Dad, Mr. Blackwell's on the phone. Something about tomorrow's board meeting." The remainder of the evening passed in final preparations for the board presentation. Alan reviewed data points with Rebecca, refined technical details with Brian, and discussed implementation strategies with Thomas via phone. By the time he finally settled into bed, exhaustion and satisfaction mingled in equal measure. Morning brought clear skies and crisp temperatures as Alan arrived at the Woodhaven Operations Center earlier than usual. The facility hummed with heightened energy, staff aware of the board's impending visit and its significance for the initiative's future funding and expansion. He had just completed a final walkthrough when Thomas Blackwell arrived, accompanied by board members and a film crew Alan hadn't expected. "Documentary team," Thomas explained, noting Alan's questioning look. "The board approved recording the Woodhaven implementation as a case study for other rural communities, if you're comfortable with it." Alan nodded his agreement, though the prospect of on-camera interviews added an unanticipated layer of pressure to the day. As the visitors toured the facility, he provided operational context, while Dr. Harrison explained technical specifications and Administrator Barnes outlined local healthcare integration. The board members, primarily physicians, business leaders, and healthcare policy experts, asked probing questions about measurable outcomes, cost-effectiveness, and scalability. Alan found himself drawing on all aspects of his experience, from practical response logistics to data analysis, as he addressed their concerns. "Mr. Foster," one board member inquired during a demonstration of the communication system, "what do you see as the most significant barrier to implementing similar initiatives in other rural communities?" Alan considered the question carefully. Not technical or financial challenges, though those exist. The most significant barrier is integrating new systems with existing local expertise. Success depends on respecting and incorporating the knowledge of people who've been serving these communities for decades. The sheriffs, EMTs, local doctors, and yes, tow truck drivers who understand the practical realities of their regions. Thomas nodded approvingly at the response. That perspective is precisely why Alan has been so instrumental to this initiative. He bridges worlds that rarely communicate effectively: technical innovation and practical implementation, corporate resources and community needs. The formal board meeting followed the tour, with Alan presenting comprehensive data on the initiative's first 6 months. Response time improvements, intervention outcomes, community engagement metrics, and implementation challenges. He concluded with yesterday's successful emergency response to the Jensen Farm situation, the real-world validation of systems previously tested only in simulations. Yesterday, mother and child faced potentially life-threatening circumstances due to geographic isolation and weather conditions, Alan explained. Today, both are healthy at Bayside Medical Center because our systems worked exactly as designed: specialized vehicle access, portable medical equipment, integrated communications, and coordinated response protocols. One family's happy outcome that represents what this initiative can accomplish for entire communities. The presentation received unanimous approval from the board, with additional funding allocated for expanding implementation to neighboring counties ahead of the original schedule. Thomas Blackwell announced the formation of a dedicated division within Blackwell Medical to oversee rural healthcare access initiatives nationwide, with Alan named as operations director. The Woodhaven implementation has exceeded all benchmarks, Thomas concluded. We're now positioned to apply these lessons across rural communities throughout the region, with potential national applications within 3 years. As the meeting adjourned and board members dispersed for individual facility tours, Thomas drew Alan aside to a quiet corner of the operations center. "There's something else I wanted to discuss, away from the formal proceedings." Thomas withdrew, an envelope from his jacket, handling it with unexpected solemnity. "This arrived yesterday. I thought you should see it privately before any public announcement." Alan accepted the envelope, noting the seal of the governor's office in the corner. Inside, he found an official letter informing Thomas Blackwell that the Rural Medical Access Initiative had been selected for the state's highest public service award, recognizing innovations in healthcare accessibility. The ceremony would take place at the state capitol in 1 month. "Congratulations," Alan said, genuinely pleased for the recognition of Thomas's vision. "This is well-deserved." "Read the second paragraph," Thomas instructed. Alan's eyes scanned down the page, stopping at a passage that mentioned his own name. The award specifically recognized the partnership between medical innovation and practical expertise, exemplified by the contributions of Alan Foster, whose actions during a severe storm catalyzed the initiative's development. "They want both," of us at the ceremony," Thomas explained. "Equal recipients." The governor apparently found the story of how this all began particularly compelling. A tow truck driver and a medical innovator creating solutions together that neither could have developed alone. Alan stared at the letter, momentarily speechless. Public recognition had never been his motivation. The practical improvements in emergency response were reward enough. Yet the acknowledgement carried meaning beyond personal validation. It represented recognition that rural communities deserved the same access to care as urban centers, that practical expertise mattered alongside technical innovation. "I'm honored," he said finally, handing the letter back to Thomas, "though this belongs to the entire team, not just us two." "Naturally, the whole team will attend," Thomas agreed, "including your children, whose contributions have been significant. But symbolically, the partnership between your practical knowledge and our technical resources represents exactly what makes this initiative unique." As they rejoined the group, Alan caught sight of the documentary crew filming the specialized vehicles being prepared for demonstration. The scene brought a sudden, vivid flashback to that stormy night, rain pounding on his tow truck windshield, Dr. Morgan's urgent voice explaining a child's life hung in the balance, his own decisive turn toward the flood-threatened road, rather than the safer route home. One choice in a moment of crisis had altered not just his own trajectory, but created expanding circles of impact that now reached throughout the county and beyond. The Foster way of service had found expression in ways neither he nor his father could have anticipated, yet remained fundamentally unchanged in its core purpose, helping people reach safety when they needed it most. Later that evening, after the board departed and the facility quieted, Alan completed a final walkthrough before heading home. In the vehicle bay, he paused beside Emergency Response Vehicle 3, the unit that had successfully reached the Jensen farm through floodwaters, its specialized design incorporating suggestions he had made based on decades navigating Woodhavens. Challenging terrain, a small plaque affixed near the driver's door caught his attention, something he hadn't noticed during the day's activities. It read simply, "Foster Series Emergency Response Vehicle, bridging the gap between help and those who need it." The unexpected tribute brought a smile to Alan's face as he turned out the lights and headed toward the exit. Outside, the Woodhaven Operations Center stood illuminated against the darkening sky, a beacon of possibility that had transformed an abandoned warehouse into a hub of innovation and service. As Alan drove toward home, he passed the familiar landmarks of Woodhaven, Miller's Diner, where neighbors had gathered to celebrate his new path, the community hospital, now equipped with enhanced emergency capabilities, the roads he had traveled countless times in his tow truck, responding to those in need. The journey had come full circle, yet opened into wider possibilities than he could have imagined on that stormy night. One decision to help a stranded doctor reach a dying child had cascaded into transformations touching his family, his community, and potentially rural healthcare nationwide. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, expanding implementation timelines, integration with additional emergency services, preparations for the governor's award ceremony. The path ahead would require the same commitment that had defined the Foster family for generations, now applied to broader horizons. But tonight, Alan drove toward home with the simple satisfaction of work well done and lives tangibly improved. The vehicle's headlights illuminated the road before him, cutting through darkness, just as the initiative was bringing light to healthcare gaps, long accepted as inevitable. Service remained service, whether delivered through a tow truck on stormy roads or through sophisticated medical systems spanning entire regions. The constants that had guided Alan throughout his life, responsibility to family, commitment to community, integrity and work, continued to light his way forward. even as the forms of their expression evolved to meet new challenges and embrace unexpected opportunities. As the lights of his Lakeview home appeared ahead, Alan felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with finished tasks. Indeed, the work of the initiative had only begun, but rather with the alignment of purpose across all dimensions of his life. The decision made that stormy night had led not just to a changed career, but to a more integrated self, where past experience and present opportunity merged into meaningful service that transcended both. The circle of 12 SUVs that had appeared in his driveway months ago had represented not just material change, but the opening of a door into broader purpose. An invitation to bring everything he knew and was into service that could transform not just individual emergencies, but entire systems of care. And Alan Foster, once defined by the tow truck he drove and the roadside assistance he provided, had discovered that the true constants in life were not external identifiers, but internal values. The commitment to help others reach safety when they found themselves stranded by circumstance, whatever form that service might take. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.